In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple stumbles upon a chilling mystery at Ashford Hall, where reclusive widower Sir Henry Ashford is found dead in his locked study, a gunshot wound to his chest. The police call it suicide, but strange. Lights, a whiff of jasmine perfume, and a missing will point to murder. As secrets unravel Charles's gambling debts, Laura's vengeful past, Evelyn's nervous lies, and a mysterious stranger's arrival, Miss Marple navigates a web of deceit, using a hidden passage and a fake will to trap the killer. In a tense library showdown, she exposes a desperate murderer driven by shame, proving that even the cleverest plans unravel under the gaze of a keen-eyed spinster. Chapter 1. The shadow at Ashford Hall. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking like a quiet heartbeat. Her cottage, neat as a pin, smelled of lavender and fresh scones. Outside, roses climbed the garden wall, and sparrows chirped in the hedge. It was a peaceful afternoon, the kind that made the village feel like a warm blanket. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes, hidden behind her spectacles, caught a flicker of unease in the air, like a shadow passing over the sun. She was knitting a scarf, soft blue wool looping through her fingers, but her mind wasn't on the stitches. She was thinking about gossip village talk, the kind that carried secrets like seeds on the wind. St. Mary Mead was small, with its stone church, cobbled lanes, and shops that knew everyone's business. Gossip was its lifeblood, and Miss Marple, with her quiet ways, was its best listener. People thought her a sweet old lady, frail and fond of tea. They didn't see the mind behind her smile, sharp as a tack, piecing together truths from whispers. This morning she'd heard something odd at the post office. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, had been chattering with young Betty, who delivered eggs. Lights at Ashford Hall again, Mrs. Price had said, her voice low, flickering in the windows, past midnight. Nobody's supposed to be there but old Sir Henry, and he's not one for late nights. Betty had nodded, wide-eyed. My brother saw it too, out by the woods. Said it gave him the creeps. Ashford Hall stood on the edge of the village, a grand old manor with ivy-covered walls and tall chimneys. Sir Henry Ashford, its owner, was a mystery himself, a widower, rich. As a king, he rarely left the house. Folks said he'd grown strange since his wife died 10 years ago, shutting himself away with his books and his money. Miss Marple had met him once, at a church fete. He'd been polite but distant, his eyes sharp like a hawk's, watching everyone. She'd thought then he was a man with secrets, the kind that festered. Now, as she knitted, she wondered about those lights. A lonely man in a big house didn't stay up late burning candles for fun. Something was stirring at Ashford Hall, and Miss Marple's curiosity, like her knitting, never stopped. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. She set her needles down and smoothed her skirt. "Come in," she called, her voice soft but clear. The door swung open, and Mrs. Dolly Bantry burst in, her cheeks pink from the walk. Dolly was Miss Marple's oldest friend, a cheerful woman with a loud laugh and a knack for gossip. Her husband, Colonel Bantry, owned Bantry Lodge, the biggest house in St. Mary Mead, until Ashford Hall overshadowed it. Dolly's hat was slightly crooked, and her coat buttons were done up wrong, a sure sign she was excited. "Jane, oh Jane." Dolly plopped into a chair, fanning herself with a handkerchief. "You'll never guess what's happened. It's dreadful, simply dreadful, miss." Marple's eyes twinkled. "Do tell, Dolly. Would you like some tea?" The kettle's just boiled. Tea. No time for tea. Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's Sir Henry Ashford. He's dead, Jane. Found this morning in his study. Shot. They say. Miss Marple's hands paused, the scarf forgotten. Shot, she said, her voice calm but her mind racing. How awful, was it? An accident? Dolly shook her head, her hat wobbling. Nobody knows. The police are there, now Inspector Craddock, you know him. He's tearing the place apart. But here's the thing, Jane, it's all very strange. The study was locked from the inside. Windows bolted, door locked, key in Sir Henry's pocket. How does a man get shot in a locked room? Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. A locked room, she murmured. How very curious, isn't it? Dolly said, her words tumbling out. And there's more. Mrs. Harris, the cook at the hall, told me Sir Henry was acting odd lately. Locking doors, checking windows, like he was scared. And those lights people saw Betty's brother, and old Mr. Finch. The butcher, they swear they saw them flickering night after night. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers itching to pick up her knitting again, but she kept still. What do the police think? She asked. Suicide, they're saying. Dolly sniffed, as if the idea was silly. But Sir Henry wasn't the sort to do himself in, was he? Rich as anything, even if he was a bit grumpy. And why lock the door? It doesn't add up. No, Miss Marple said softly, it doesn't. She thought of Sir Henry's hawk-like eyes, the way he'd watched the crowd at the fete. A man like that didn't give up easily. Suicide felt wrong, like a stitch dropped in a pattern. She glanced at Dolly. Have you been to the hall? Not yet, Dolly said. But Arthur's, they're now Colonel Bantry, you know. He's friends with the magistrate, and they asked him to come. He says it's a mess. Sir Henry's family's turned up already, sniffing round the will. His nephew, Charles, and that niece, Laura, who ran off years ago, and Evelyn, his young wife, well widow now. Oh, Jane, you should come. You're so good at noticing things. Miss Marple smiled faintly. I'm just an old woman who likes to knit, Dolly. Rubbish, Dolly laughed. You're sharper than half the police force. Come with me to Ashford Hall. The inspector won't mind, and I'd feel better with you there. Something's not right, Jane. I can feel it. Miss Marple hesitated, but only for a moment. Her curiosity was like a cat, quiet but eager to pounce. Very well, she said. Let me fetch my coat. The walk to Ashford Hall was brisk, the autumn air crisp with the smell of fallen leaves. St. Mary Mead's lanes were quiet, save for a few villagers whispering outside the bakery. They glanced at Miss Marple and Dolly, their eyes full of questions. News travelled fast in a village, faster than the post. Ashford Hall loomed ahead, its grey stone walls half hidden by ivy. The iron gates stood open, and a police car was parked in the drive. A young constable, barely out of school, stood guard, looking nervous. He tipped his hat as Dolly marched past, Miss Marple trailing behind with her small, neat steps. Inside, the hall was grand but gloomy. The entrance hall had a high ceiling, a chandelier dripping with dust, and a staircase that curved like a snake. Portraits of stern-looking Ashfords stared down, their eyes following Miss Marple as she walked. The air smelled of old wood and wax polish, with a faint hint of something sharp gunpowder, perhaps. Inspector Craddock met them in the hall. He was a tall man, young for his rank, with a serious face but kind eyes. He'd worked with Miss Marple before and knew her knack for solving puzzles. Mrs. Bantry, he said, nodding. Miss Marple didn't expect to see you here, Dolly insisted. Miss Marple said, her voice mild. Such a terrible thing. May I ask what happened? Craddock sighed, rubbing his neck. Sir Henry Ashford, found at 8 this morning by his housekeeper, Mrs. Harris, shot through the chest in his study. Door locked, windows bolted. The gun was on the floor, his own revolver. Looks like he did it himself, but he trailed off, frowning. But you're not sure, Miss Marple finished, her eyes bright. Craddock gave a small smile. You don't miss much, do you? It's the locked room. No sign of anyone else, but it feels off. Come see for yourself, if you like. Dolly clapped her hands. Oh, let's, Jane. Miss Marple followed Craddock down a long corridor, her shoes tapping on the polished floor. The study was at the back of the house, a heavy oak door standing ajar. Inside, the room was large, with tall bookshelves, a leather armchair, and a desk piled with papers. A rug, rich red, covered the floor, and a single window looked out on the garden. The window was shut tight, its bolt rusted with age. Sir Henry lay slumped in the armchair, his face pale, his eyes closed. A dark stain spread across his shirt, and the revolver glinted on the rug beside him. Miss Marple stood in the doorway, her hands clasped, taking it all in. The room was tidy, too tidy, as if someone had straightened it. A book on the shelf was tilted, its spine catching her eye. The history of Ashford Hall. Odd, she thought, for a book to be out of place in such a neat room. She stepped closer, her nose wrinkling. There it was, a faint scent, sweet and floral, like perfume. Not gunpowder, not Sir Henry's pipe tobacco. She glanced at Craddock. Was anyone else here when he was found? Just Mrs. Harris, Craddock said. She has a key to the study. Says she came to bring his tea and found him like this. She's shaken up, poor woman. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the desk. Papers were stacked neatly, a pen placed just so. Too perfect, she thought. A man about to end his life didn't tidy his desk first. She bent slightly, peering at the rug. A faint smudge, like a footprint, caught her eye, but it was too faint to be sure. Dolly hovered behind her, whispering, "What do you think, Jane?" "Isn't it creepy? It's interesting," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. She turned to Craddock. "May I speak to Mrs. Harris?" Craddock raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "She's in the kitchen. This way." The kitchen was warm, smelling of bread and tea. Mrs. Harris, a stout woman with grey hair, sat at a table, twisting a handkerchief. Her eyes were red, and she jumped when Craddock spoke. "Mrs. Harris, Miss Marple has a few questions. She's helping us out." "Oh, Mrs. Harris said, her voice trembling. "It's awful. Sir Henry was a good man, even if he was quiet. Who'd do such a thing?" "That's what we're here to find out," Miss Marple said kindly. "You found him this morning?" "Yes, miss. I brought his tea at 8, like always. Knocked, no answer. I used my key, and there he was." She dabbed her eyes. "Door was locked, I swear. I don't understand it." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gentle but sharp. "Did Sir Henry seem worried lately? Any visitors, perhaps?" Mrs. Harris hesitated. "He was jumpy. Kept locking doors, checking windows, said he didn't trust anyone. And there was a man, a stranger, a few days ago. Came to the gate, asking for Sir Henry. I didn't let him in Sir Henry's orders. A stranger," Miss Marple said, her voice curious. "What did he look like? Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low." Didn't see his face clear. He left. When I said Sir Henry wasn't seeing visitors, Mrs. Harris shivered. Gave me a bad feeling. He did. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. A stranger, lights at night, a locked room. The pieces didn't fit yet, but they would. They always did. Dolly tugged her arm. Jane, the family's here. Charles and Laura and Evelyn. They're in the drawing room, arguing already. Want to meet them? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Oh yes, she said. I think that would be most enlightening. The drawing room was grand, with velvet curtains and a roaring fire. 3 people stood inside, their voices sharp. Charles Ashford, Sir Henry's nephew, was a handsome man. In his 30s, with slick hair and a flashy tie. He paced, his hands in his pockets. Laura Ashford, his cousin, sat by the window, her dark hair pulled back, her face pale but defiant. She was older, perhaps 40, with the look of someone who'd seen trouble. Evelyn Ashford, Sir Henry's second wife, was young, barely 25, with blonde curls and a nervous smile. She clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting between the others. Miss Marple. Mrs. Bantry, Craddock said, introducing them. This is Charles Ashford, Laura Ashford, and Mrs. Evelyn Ashford. Charles stopped pacing, his smile tight, charmed. I'm sure, though it's a rotten time for introductions. My uncle's dead, and the police are poking about. I'm so sorry, Miss Marple said, her voice soft. It must be a terrible shock. Laura's eyes flicked to her. Shock. Hardly. Uncle Henry was old and miserable, but shot, that's unexpected. Her voice was cool, almost sharp. Evelyn sniffled, her voice trembling. He was kind to me. I don't know why anyone would hurt him. Miss Marple watched them, her face gentle but her mind racing. Charles's restless hands, Laura's cold tone, Evelyn's tears, they all told a story. She thought of the perfume, the tilted book, the smudge on the rug. Small things, but small things mattered. Like stitches in a scarf, they held the pattern together. Craddock cleared his throat. We're still investigating. If you think of anything at all, let me know, of course, Charles said, too quickly. Laura just nodded, her eyes on the window. Evelyn dabbed her eyes, saying nothing. As Miss Marple and Dolly left the room, Dolly whispered, What do you think, Jane? They're all hiding something, aren't they? Miss Marple smiled faintly. People usually are, Dolly. The trick is finding out what. They stepped back into the hall, the portraits watching them. Miss Marple's mind buzzed, piecing together the morning's clues. A locked room, a stranger, flickering lights, and that perfume suite, out of place. She thought of a girl in St. Mary Mead years ago, a girl who wore too much perfume and lied about where she'd been. Lies, Miss Marple knew, had a way of unraveling. Dolly, she said, I think I'll stay in the village a bit longer. Ashford Hall has a story to tell, and I'd like to hear it. Dolly grinned. I knew you'd say that. Come on, let's get you settled at the lodge. This mystery's just starting, isn't it? Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright. Oh yes, she said. And I do love a good mystery. The rest of the day passed in a blur of village chatter. Miss Marple sat in Dolly's parlour at Bantry Lodge, sipping tea and listening as Dolly repeated every rumour she'd heard. The postmistress said Charles owed money to some rough types in London. The vicar remembered Laura leaving St. Mary Mead after a scandal nobody dared mention. And Evelyn, poor Evelyn, was whispered to have married Sir Henry for his money. Though she seemed sweet enough. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking, her mind sorting the gossip like cards. She thought of the study, the locked door, the gun. Suicide was tidy, but life wasn't. Murder, she suspected, was messy and far more likely. The perfume lingered in her thoughts, a clue that didn't fit yet, and the stranger tall, dark coat, hat pulled low. Was he real, or a story Mrs. Harris told to shift suspicion? As night fell, Miss Marple looked out at the village, its lights glowing softly. Somewhere out there, in the shadow of Ashford Hall, was the truth. She'd find it, she knew, not with grand gestures, but with quiet watching, listening, thinking. The village held its secrets close, but Miss Marple was patient. She'd unravel them, one stitch at a time. Chapter 2. The Locked Room. Puzzle. The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains of Bantry Lodge, casting delicate shadows on the parlour floor. Miss Jane Marple sat in a cushioned chair, her knitting needles clicking steadily, a soft grey scarf growing in her lap. The room smelled of fresh tea and toast, and a fire crackled in the hearth, chasing away the autumn chill. Dolly Bantry bustled in, her cheeks flushed from a quick walk to the village. She carried a basket of apples, which she plopped on the table with a thud. "Jane, you'll never believe the talk in St. Mary Mead today," Dolly said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Everyone's got a theory about Sir Henry's death. The baker thinks it's ghosts, and Mrs. Price swears it's that stranger Mrs. Harris saw. Oh, and the vicar's wife says Charles Ashford was in the pub last week, grumbling about his uncle's money." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "People do love a story, don't they?" she said, her voice soft but sharp. Her needles didn't pause, but her mind was already sorting the gossip like threads in a tangle. Charles's grumbling, the stranger, the villagers' chatteret, all meant something, even if the pattern wasn't clear yet. She'd learned long ago that small talk hid big truths. Dolly sank into a chair, fanning herself. "I'm going back to Ashford Hall this morning. Inspector Craddock's there, poking around. He's got that look, Jane, like he's stuck. Will you come? You saw things yesterday nobody else did." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I suppose I could take a look. The study interests me. Locked rooms are such curious things." She set her knitting down, smoothing her skirt. Her curiosity was awake, like a cat stretching after a nap. The locked study, the faint perfume, the tilted book, those details nagged at her, small but stubborn, like a loose stitch. The walk to Ashford Hall was brisk, the air crisp with the scent of damp leaves. St. Mary Mead was awake now, its cobbled lanes busy with villagers. A milk cart rattled past, and two women whispered outside the grocer's, their eyes darting toward Miss Marple and Dolly. News of Sir Henry's death had spread like wildfire, and every glance held a question. Miss Marple kept her head down, her steps neat, but she missed nothing. At the hall, the iron gates creaked as they entered. The same young constable stood guard, looking even more nervous today. He nodded as Dolly swept past, Miss Marple following with her quiet grace. The manor loomed ahead, its ivy-covered walls dark against the morning light. Inside, the air was heavy, smelling of old wood and something sharp gunpowder, Miss Marple thought, lingering from the shot that killed Sir Henry. Inspector Craddock met them in the entrance hall, his face tired but alert. "Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "Good to see you. It's been a long night. Any news, Inspector?" Dolly asked, her eyes wide. "Have you solved it?" Craddock sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Not yet. The locked room's got us stumped. No fingerprints but Sir Henry's." On the gun, no sign of a struggle. The doctor says he died around midnight, give or take. Suicide's still the best guess, but... He trailed off, glancing at Miss Marple. But it doesn't feel right, she finished, her voice gentle. May I see the study again? Craddock nodded. Be my guest. We've left it as it was, mostly. Just watch your step. The study was, as Miss Marple remembered, large, gloomy, with tall bookshelves and a heavy desk. Sir Henry's body was gone, taken for examination, but the armchair still bore a dark stain. The revolver was gone too, bagged by the police. The window was shut, its bolt rusted, and the oak door stood open, its lock gleaming. Miss Marple stood in the doorway, her hands clasped, her eyes moving slowly over the room. The rug caught her. Attention first. That faint smudge she'd noticed yesterday was clearer now. Partial footprint, small, like a woman's shoe. She bent slightly, her knees creaking, and peered at it. The smudge was near the desk, not the door or window. Odd, she thought. If someone had been here, how had they left? She straightened, her gaze shifting to the bookshelf. The tilted book The History of Ashford Hall was still out of place, its spine catching the light. She stepped closer, her nose wrinkling. That scent again, sweet and floral, hung in the air, fainter now, but unmistakable. Inspector, she said, her voice calm, have you checked the bookshelves? Craddock raised an eyebrow. The shelves. We looked for papers. Letters, anything obvious. Why? Miss Marple smiled, her eyes bright. Just a thought. Old houses have secrets, don't they? She reached out, her fingers brushing the tilted book. It wobbled slightly, as if loose. She didn't move it, not yet, but filed the detail. Away, secrets, she knew, hid in plain sight. Dolly hovered nearby, her voice a whisper. Jane, what do you see? It's all so creepy. It's a puzzle, Miss Marple said softly, and puzzles have pieces. We just need to find them. Craddock cleared his throat. We've got the family coming in soon. Charles, Laura, Evelyn and the lawyer, Mr. Grayson. They're here to talk about the will or a lack of it. Seems Sir Henry was rewriting it before he died. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. A new will. That's interesting. Was it found? Not yet, Craddock said. Mr. Grayson says it was nearly done, but it's missing. The old will leaves. Everything to Charles and Laura, split even. Evelyn gets a small allowance. If there's a new one, though, he shrugged. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A missing will, a locked room, a dead man. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was blurry, like a reflection in a pond. She needed more. The drawing room was warmer than the study, the fire crackling in the grate. Charles Ashford stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, his face tight. Laura sat in a backed chair, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes cold as she watched the room. Evelyn perched on a sofa, twisting her handkerchief, her blonde curls bouncing as she moved. Mr. Grayson, the lawyer, stood near the fire, a thin man with a pinched face and glasses that slipped down his nose. He clutched a leather briefcase, looking uneasy. Craddock introduced Miss Marple and Dolly, his voice formal. This is Miss Marple, a friend helping with inquiries. Mrs. Bantry, you know. Charles snorted, his smile sharp. Helping. What's an old lady going to do? Knit us a confession. Dolly bristled, but Miss Marple just smiled. I do enjoy knitting, she said mildly. It helps me think. And I find people are often surprising. Laura's eyes flicked to her, sharp and wary. Let's get this over with. What do you want to know, Inspector? Craddock sat, his notebook open. Let's start with where you were the night Sir Henry died. Midnight, thereabouts. Charles shrugged, still by the window. London. At my club, plenty of people saw me. Until when? Craddock pressed. Late, Charles said, his voice tight. 2, maybe 3. Took a train back in the morning. Miss Marple watched him, noting the way his fingers twitched in his pockets. Nervous, she thought. Or lying. She'd seen boys in the village lie about stealing apples, their hands betraying them the same way. Laura leaned back, her voice cool. I was here, in my room, reading. I don't sleep much. Anyone see you? Craddock asked. Laura's lips thinned. No, I don't need a babysitter. Evelyn's voice was small, trembling. I was in bed, Sir Henry. He told me to lock my door at night, said it was safer. I heard nothing until Mrs. Harris screamed in the morning. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp. Evelyn's fear seemed real, but that locked door was its safety or something else. And that perfume, so like the scent in the study. She glanced at Evelyn's wrists, where a faint floral smell might linger, but said nothing. Mr. Grayson cleared, his throat, his voice dry. I was in London, at my office, working late on Sir Henry's papers. He'd asked me to revise his will, but it wasn't finished. I came as soon as I heard. What was in the new will? Craddock asked. Grayson hesitated, his glasses slipping. Sir Henry wanted changes, more for Mrs. Ashford-Evelyn, less for Charles and Laura. He didn't say why, just that it was time to set things right. Charles spun from the window, his face red. Set things right. He was cutting us out, you mean? After all, we put up with his moods, his rules. Charles, Laura snapped, her voice like a whip. Shut up. Miss Marple watched them, her face gentle, but her eyes missing nothing. Family, she thought, always so messy. She remembered a family in St. Mary Mead, years ago, fighting over a farm. Greed had torn them apart, just like it might here. Craddock closed his notebook. We'll check your stories. If you think of anything at all, tell me. As they left the drawing room, Dolly whispered, Jane, they're all so jumpy. Charles is hiding something, isn't he? Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice low. But they all are, Dolly. The trick is finding out what fits. Back in the study, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the bookshelf. She reached for the tilted book, pulling it gently. It came free, revealing a small gap behind it. Her heart quickened, but she kept her face calm. The gap was narrow, too small to mean much yet. She replaced the book, her fingers brushing the shelf. Dust, but not much. Someone had been here, touching things. Inspector, she called softly, have you looked behind the shelves? Craddock frowned, stepping closer. Behind, it's solid wood. Miss Marple, perhaps, she said, smiling. But old houses are full of surprises. He tapped the shelf, then shrugged. We'll check it. Anything else? She hesitated, then said the rug, that smudge. It's a footprint, I think. Small, like a woman's. Craddock knelt, peering at the rug. You're right, faint, but there. Could be Mrs. Harris, though she was in here. Perhaps, Miss Marple said again, her voice mild. But she thought of Evelyn, her nervous hands, her floral scent. And Laura, with her cold eyes and secrets. Even Mrs. Harris, so quick to mention a stranger. Small feet, small clues. As they left the study, a maid hurried past, her face pale. "Inspector," she called. "It's Mary, the housemaid. She's in the kitchen, crying her eyes out. Says she saw something the night Sir Henry died." Craddock's eyes lit up. "Let's go." The kitchen was warm, the air thick with the smell of soup. Mary, a young girl with red-rimmed eyes, sat at the table, twisting her apron. Mrs. Harris hovered, patting her shoulder. There, love. Tell the inspector." Mary sniffled, her voice shaking. "I didn't want to say before. I was scared. But that night, I saw someone. Outside, near the garden. A man, tall, in a dark coat. He was by the study window, looking in." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "When was this, Mary?" "Just before midnight," Mary said. "I was fetching water from the pump. I saw him, then he was gone, like a shadow." Craddock scribbled in his notebook. "Did you see his face?" Mary shook her head. "Too dark, but he moved fast, like he didn't want to be seen." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The stranger? Again, real or a story? She thought of village girls, telling tales to seem important. But Mary's fear looked real, her hands trembling. Another piece, but where did it fit? Dolly tugged her arm. "Jane, this is getting spooky. A stranger, a locked room, what's next?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes bright. "We'll see, Dolly. Puzzles take time." As they walked back to Bantry Lodge, the village was quiet, the sun dipping low. Miss Marple's mind buzzed with clues. The footprint, the perfume, the book, the stranger. She thought of a case years ago, a locked barn and a missing key. The answer had been simple, hidden in plain sight. This, she knew, would be too. At the lodge, Dolly poured tea, her hands shaking slightly. "Jane, do you think it's murder?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant. "I think," she said, "that Sir Henry didn't lock his door for nothing. Someone wanted him dead, Dolly, and they're still here, hiding." Dolly shivered. "You're giving me goosebumps. What now?" "Now," Miss Marple said, picking up her knitting, "we watch, and we listen. The truth always comes out, if you're patient." Her needles clicked, the scarf growing longer. Outside, Ashford Hall stood silent, its secrets locked tight. But Miss Marple was patient, and secrets, she knew, couldn't hide forever. Chapter 3. The Ashford Family Secrets. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a soft, grey blanket. Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlour of Bantry Lodge, her knitting needles clicking like a steady clock. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth and the faint smell of wood smoke. Her grey scarf was nearly done, its neat rose a mirror of her orderly thoughts. Outside, the world was quiet, but inside her mind a storm of ideas swirled. The locked study, the faint perfume, the smudged footprint. Mary's stranger each was a piece of a puzzle, and Miss Marple loved puzzles. Dolly Bantry burst in, her hat askew, her cheeks pink from the chilly air. She carried a newspaper, its headline bold, "Mysterious Death at Ashford Hall." "Jane, look at this," she said, waving the paper. "The village is buzzing. They're saying Sir Henry was murdered, not suicide. And Mrs. Price at the post office swears she saw Charles Ashford sneaking around the hall 2 nights before it happened." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Village talk is like a river, Dolly. It carries truth and mud together. We must sift carefully." She set her knitting down, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Charles sneaking around, she thought, that fit with his twitchy hands and quick lies. But fit where? She needed more pieces. Dolly flopped into a chair, her voice eager. Inspector Craddock's at the hall again. He's questioning the family. Charles, Laura, Evelyn, and that lawyer, Mr. Grayson. Oh, Jane, we must go. You'll see something nobody else does. I know it. Miss Marple smiled faintly. You're very kind, Dolly. I suppose another visit couldn't hurt. The hall has stories to tell, and I'm a good listener. She rose, smoothing her skirt, her curiosity sharp as a needle. The missing will, the locked room, the family secrets, they were threads, and she'd weave them together yet. The walk to Ashford Hall was brisk, the mist curling around their ankles. St. Mary Mead's lanes were alive with whispers. A boy on a bicycle stared as they passed, and two women outside the bakery hushed when they saw Miss Marple's neat figure. She kept her eyes down, but her ears caught every word: Charles's debts, Laura's scandal, Evelyn's tears. Gossip. She knew was never just gossip at the hall. The iron gates stood open, the young constable still at his post. He looked tired, his cap tilted, but he nodded as Dolly marched past, Miss Marple trailing with her quiet steps. The manor's stone walls loomed, cold and heavy, the ivy glistening with dew. Inside, the entrance hall was dim, the chandelier catching faint light. The portraits of old Ashfords watched, their eyes stern, as if guarding secrets. Inspector Craddock met them in the corridor, his face lined with worry. Mrs. Bantry, Miss Marple, he said, his voice low. Glad you're here. It's getting complicated. We found something this morning, a letter, half burned, in the study's fireplace. Looks like Sir Henry wrote it, but it's hard to read. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face stayed calm. A letter. May I see it? Craddock nodded. It's in the study. Come along. The study was as gloomy as before, its air thick with the smell of old books and faint gunpowder. The armchair's stain was darker now, a grim reminder of Sir Henry's death. The rug still held that smudged footprint, and the bookshelf loomed. Its tilted booked the history of Ashford Hall catching Miss Marple's eye again. She'd check that later, she decided. Craddock pointed to the fireplace, where ashes lay in a heap. On the desk was a small evidence bag, holding a charred scrap of paper. He handed it to Miss Marple, his voice careful. Found it this morning. The fire was out when we first checked, but one of my men noticed this buried in the ashes. Miss Marple held the bag, her eyes sharp. The paper was brittle, its edges black, but words were visible in Sir Henry's spidery handwriting. Cannot. Trust. Hidden. Beware the. The rest was gone, burned to nothing. She frowned, her mind racing. A warning, perhaps, or a confession. She thought of a letter she'd once found in St. Mary Mead, tucked in a Bible, revealing a thief. Letters, she knew, held truths. Very curious, she said softly. Was the fire lit the night he died? Craddock shook his head. Mrs. Harris says no. Sir Henry hated fires, said they made the room stuffy. If someone lit it, it was after he was shot. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the rug. The footprint was clearer in the morning light, small and delicate, near the desk. She bent slightly, her knees creaking, and studied it. Not Mrs. Harris's heavy boots, she thought. Someone else, someone light-footed. She glanced at the bookshelf, the tilted book nagging at her. Secrets hid in odd places, she knew. Dolly hovered, her voice a whisper. Jane, what's that letter mean? It's creepy, isn't it? It's a clue, Miss Marple said, her voice mild. And clues are like breadcrumbs. They lead somewhere, if you follow them. Craddock pocketed the evidence bag. We're bringing the family in now. Want to sit in? They're not happy, especially Charles. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Oh yes, people are so interesting when they're unhappy. The drawing room was warmer, the fire roaring, its light dancing on the velvet curtains. Charles Ashford paced, his flashy tie loose, his hands restless. Laura sat stiffly, her dark hair pulled tight, her eyes like ice. Evelyn perched on the sofa, her blonde curls trembling, her handkerchief twisted into knots. Mr. Grayson stood by the fire, his briefcase clutched like a shield, his glasses slipping down his nose. Craddock cleared his throat, his notebook open. We found a letter in the study, half burned. Looks like Sir Henry wrote it. Any of you know about it? Charles stopped pacing, his face tight. A letter. What's it say? Not much, Craddock said. Bits and pieces. Something about trust and hiding. Ring any bells? Laura's lips thinned. Uncle Henry was always scribbling. Notes, lists, nonsense. He was paranoid, locking doors, muttering about enemies. Maybe he burned it himself. Evelyn's voice was small, shaking. He was scared lately, kept saying someone was watching him. I told him to tell the police, but he wouldn't. Miss Marple watched her, noting the way her hands shook. Fear or guilt. She thought of a girl in the village, years ago, who cried too icily when caught stealing. Tears could hide lies. Charles snorted, his voice sharp. Scared, he was just. Old and cranky. Probably wrote that letter to scare us, keep us in line. He loved his little games. Mr. Grayson adjusted his glasses, his voice dry. Sir Henry was cautious. Yes, he was changing his will, as I told you. Perhaps the letter was about that. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. The will, she said softly. You said it was missing. Did Sir Henry say why he was changing it? Grayson hesitated, his fingers tightening on his briefcase. He wanted to. Right or wrong, he said. More for Mrs. Ashford Evelyn, less for Charles and Laura. He didn't explain, but he was firm. Charles's face reddened. Right or wrong? He was cutting me out. You mean, after I stuck by him, running his errands, putting up with his moods? Charles, Laura snapped, her voice cold. You're not helping. Miss Marple watched them, her face gentle but her mind racing. Greed, she thought. It made people loud, careless. She remembered a farmer in St. Mary Mead shouting about land, his anger giving him away. Charles's temper was a clue, but Laura's silence was louder. Craddock scribbled in his notebook. Where were you all the night before last? Midnight, when Sir Henry died. Charles shrugged, his voice tight. I told you, London, my club. Ask anyone. Laura's eyes didn't move. In my room, reading. I don't sleep much. Evelyn sniffled, her voice barely a whisper. In bed, I locked my door, like Henry said. Grayson coughed, his voice thin. London, my office. Working on Sir Henry's papers. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes soft but sharp. Mrs. Ashford, she said gently, you locked your door. Did you hear anything? A shot, perhaps. Evelyn's eyes widened, her handkerchief twisting. No, nothing. I sleep soundly. Miss Marple nodded, but her mind noted the hesitation. Evelyn's floral perfume wafted faintly, so like the scent in the study. She thought of a shop girl in the village, years ago, whose perfume gave her away when she lied about a theft. Scents, like footprints, didn't lie. Craddock closed his notebook. We'll check your alibis. If you think of anything about that letter, tell me. As the family left, Charles muttering, Laura silent, Evelyn dabbing her eyes, Miss Marple lingered by the fire. She turned to Craddock, her voice mild. The letter, was it written in ink or pencil? Craddock blinked, surprised. Ink? Why? Just curious, she said, smiling. Ink didn't smudge easily, she thought. Someone burned that letter to hide something, but they'd been careless. Careless people made mistakes. Dolly tugged her arm. Jane, you're thinking something, aren't you? I can tell. Miss Marple chuckled softly. I'm always thinking, Dolly. Let's take a walk in the garden. Fresh air clears the mind. The garden behind Ashford Hall was wild, its roses overgrown, their petals scattered on the path. The air was damp, the mist lingering in the hedges. Miss Marple walked slowly, her eyes scanning the ground. She stopped near the study window, its frame old and weathered. The ground below was soft, churned by recent rain. A faint mark caught her arduous scuff, like a shoe scraping the earth. Dolly, she said, pointing, look at that. Near the window, Dolly squinted. A mark could be anything, Jane. A gardener, maybe. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice soft. But gardeners wore boots, heavy and wide. This mark was narrow, like a man's shore, a woman's. She thought of Mary's stranger, tall and quick, by the window. Real or a story. She needed to talk to Mary again. They found the housemaid in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, her hands still shaky. Mrs. Harris was gone, leaving Mary alone. She jumped when Miss Marple spoke, her knife clattering. Mary, Miss Marple said kindly, you said you saw a man by the study window. Can you tell me more? Mary's eyes darted, her voice low. I don't know, miss. It was dark. He was tall, in a coat. Moved fast, like he was scared. I didn't see his face. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. You were brave to tell us. Did you see anything else that night? Anything odd? Mary hesitated, her fingers twisting her apron. There was a light in the study, flickering. I thought it was Sir Henry, but now... She shivered, her voice dropping. It's like the house is haunted. Miss Marple smiled, patting her hand. Houses aren't haunted, Mary. People make shadows, not ghosts. But she thought of those lights, flickering at midnight, whispered about in the village. A light in a locked room, a burned letter, a scuffed mark. The puzzle was growing, its pieces sharper. As they left the kitchen, Dolly whispered, Jane, this is getting stranger. A letter, a stranger. Light, what does it mean? It means, Miss Marple said, her eyes bright, someone's trying. Very hard to hide something. But they're not as clever as they think. Back at Bantry Lodge, the afternoon faded into evening. Dolly poured tea, her hands steadier now, but her eyes were wide. Jane, do you think it's one of them, Charles? Laura, Evelyn. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her knitting back in her hands. Someone, she said softly, wanted Sir Henry dead. The letter, the footprint, the perfume, they all point somewhere. We just need to follow. Dolly shivered, pulling her shawl tight. You're so calm, Jane. I'd be a wreck. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. Patience, Dolly. The truth comes out, like a loose thread. Pull gently, and it unravels. Outside, the mist thickened, hiding Ashford Hall in a grey veil. Miss Marple's mind turned over the clues. each one a stitch in a pattern. The letter, half-burned, whispering of mistrust. The footprint, small and secret. The perfume, sweet and guilty. And the stranger, a shadow in the dark. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, a stolen necklace and a hidden note. The answer had been simple, tucked in a book. This answer, she knew, was close, waiting for her to find it. As the fire died down, she picked up her scarf, its grey wool soft under her fingers. The puzzle wasn't solved, but it was taking shape, and Miss Marple, quiet and patient, was ready to keep knitting. Chapter 4. Whispers. In the village, the morning sun filtered through the laced curtains of Miss Marple's modest sitting room in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak table. She sat in her favourite armchair, a ball of soft grey wool in her lap, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a scarf for her nephew Raymond's upcoming visit. The familiar routine steadied her thoughts, allowing her mind to sift through the puzzle of Sir Henry Ashford's death. The locked study, the faint perfume, the misplaced book. These details lingered, like threads waiting to be woven into a coherent pattern. But it was the village itself, with its undercurrents of gossip and half-remembered secrets, that Miss Marple knew would yield the next clue. She set her knitting aside and glanced at the clock. It was just past 10, time for her daily walk to the village shop. The exercise was less about necessity, her pantry was well stocked, and more about opportunity. St. Mary Mead, for all its sleepy charm, was a hive of whispered confidences, and Miss Marple had long ago learned that the postmistress, the butcher, or even the vicar's wife could unwittingly reveal truths more valuable than any police report. As she donned her coat and pinned her hat, Miss Marple reflected on her visit to Ashford Hall the previous day. The locked study had been a conundrum, its heavy oak door bolted from the inside and its windows latched tight. Inspector Craddock, efficient but occasionally impatient, had leaned heavily on the theory of suicide, pointing to the revolver found in Sir Henry's hand. Yet Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of observing human nature, rebelled against the simplicity of it. The scent of perfume floral, with a hint of jasmine, had been faint but unmistakable, and the book, a worn copy of the Pickwick Papers, had been oddly out of place among Sir Henry's meticulously arranged legal tomes. It was as if someone had wanted the scene to look like a suicide, but had overlooked the small details that betrayed artifice. She stepped out into the crisp autumn air, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path leading to the village. The High Street was bustling in its quiet way. Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, was sweeping the shop's doorstep, while young Tommy Pierce darted past with a bundle of newspapers. Miss Marple nodded politely, her eyes sharp behind her gentle smile. Her first stop was the post office, where Miss Hartnell, the postmistress, was sorting letters with her usual air of self-importance. "Good morning, Miss Hartnell," Miss Marple said, placing a few coins on the counter for a packet of stamps. "Such a chilly day, isn't it? I imagine you've been busy with all the talk about Ashford Hall." Miss Hartnell's eyes gleamed, as if she'd been waiting for an invitation to share. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful, simply dreadful. Sir Henry, dead in his own study, and they're saying it's suicide. I can't believe it, not a man like him, so proud and particular. Why, just last week he was here, posting a letter to London, looking as hale as ever." Miss Marple tilted her head, encouraging more. "London, you say? Perhaps business matters, though I've heard he kept to himself lately." Miss Hartnell leaned forward, lowering her voice. "That's what they say, but I've seen that nephew of his, Charles Ashford, skulking about the village more than usual. Always in a hurry, that one, and not a penny to his name, if you believe the rumours. They say he's in debt to half the bookmakers in London. Gambling, you know, such a nasty habit. Miss Marple's expression remained placid, but her mind filed away the detail. Charles Ashford, with his polished charm and restless energy, had struck her as a man accustomed to living beyond his means. Gambling debts could make a person desperate, especially with a wealthy uncle nearing a decision about his will. "Dear me," she murmured. "How unfortunate for young Mr. Ashford. I suppose family tensions can run high in such grand houses." Miss Hartnell nodded vigorously. "Oh, indeed. And that's not all. There's talk about Laura, his niece. You remember her, don't you? Left St. Mary Mead years ago after some todo nobody speaks of directly. Came back recently, all artsy with her paints and easels, but she's not been herself. Keeps to the manor mostly, doesn't mix with us like she used to." Miss Marple recalled Laura's pale face and guarded eyes at Ashford Hall. There had been a tension in her manner, a flicker of something anger, perhaps, or fear when Sir Henry's name was mentioned. "How curious," Miss Marple said. "I do hope she's well. Family disputes can be so trying." As she left the post office, Miss Marple turned her steps toward the vicarage, where the Reverend Clement and his wife Griselda were known to be fonts of village lore. The vicarage garden was a riot of late-blooming roses, and Griselda, ever youthful despite her years as a vicar's wife, was snipping blooms for a bouquet. Miss Marple, Griselda called, waving her secateurs. "You're just in time to save me from pruning these roses to death. Come in for a cup of tea, and tell me what you make of this awful business at Ashford Hall." Inside, over steaming cups of Earl Grey, Miss Marple gently steered the conversation toward the Ashfords. Griselda, never one to resist a good story, was eager to oblige. "It's all so tragic," she said, her eyes wide. "Sir Henry was such a figure, you know, always so proper. But that family, well, there's always been whispers. Laura, for instance. She was such a bright girl, always sketching by the river. Then, oh, it must be 10 years ago, she left suddenly. No one knew why. But the vicar heard from old Mrs. Bantry that it had something to do with Sir Henry's first wife, Margaret. Some scandal, though nobody ever got the full story." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning to Laura's abrupt departure. A scandal involving Sir Henry's first wife could explain much resentments that festered, motives that lingered. And now Laura's back, she mused aloud. "I wonder what brought her." Griselda shrugged. "Who knows? But she's been seen at the manor, and not looking happy about it. And then there's Evelyn, Sir Henry's new wife. So young, barely older than Laura. The village was all abuzz when he married her. Some say she was after his money, but I think she's just nervous, poor thing, always looking over her shoulder." Miss Marple nodded, thinking of Evelyn's anxious demeanour at Ashford Hall. The scent of jasmine perfume clung to her memory, a thread connecting Evelyn to the study. Could it be so simple? Or was the perfume a deliberate misdirection, like the misplaced book? She thanked Griselda and made her way back to the high street, her mind weaving the village's whispers into a tapestry of possibilities. Her final stop was the village shop, where Mrs. Lucas, the shopkeeper, was arranging jars of homemade jam. Mrs. Lucas was less gossipy than Miss Hartnell, but had a keen eye for detail, especially about comings and goings. "Good day, Mrs. Lucas," Miss Marple said, selecting a jar of gooseberry jam. "I hear there's been quite a stir at Ashford Hall." Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Mrs. Lucas wiped her hands on her apron, considering. Well, now you mention it, there was something odd. Mary, the maid up at the hall, came in 2 days ago, looking all flustered, bought a packet of tea and nearly dropped her coins. Said she'd seen someone lurking near the manor gates the night Sir Henry died. A stranger, she called him, though she couldn't describe him proper. Too dark, she said. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. Mary's story about a stranger matched the servant's account at Ashford Hall, but there was something rehearsed in its telling, as if Mary had been coached. How distressing for her, Miss Marple said. I do hope she's not too shaken. As she walked home, the pieces of the puzzle shifted in her mind. Charles's debts, Laura's mysterious past, Evelyn's nervousness, Mary's stranger, and the missing will all were threads, but none yet formed a clear pattern. She thought of her old friend, Lady Harmon, who once staged a dramatic scene to distract from a theft. Was someone at Ashford Hall playing a similar game, using the locked room and the stranger to obscure the truth? Back in her sitting room, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the click of her needles a counterpoint to her thoughts. The village had given her much to ponder, but it was the human element, the greed, the fear, the hidden grudges that would unlock this mystery. She smiled faintly, recalling a young man in St. Mary Mead who had once lied about a stranger to cover his own misdeeds. People, she thought, were so very predictable, even in murder. Tomorrow she would return to Ashford Hall. Mrs. Bantry had insisted she stay a few days, and Miss Marple sensed the manor held more secrets perhaps in its gardens or in the shadows of its old walls. For now she knitted, her mind as sharp as her needles, stitching together the whispers of St. Mary Mead into a pattern only she could see. Chapter 5. The missing will. Miss Marple's bedroom at Ashford Hall overlooked the manor's sprawling gardens, where the late autumn roses clung stubbornly to their thorny stems. The room, with its heavy damask curtains and polished mahogany furniture, was far grander than her modest cottage in St. Mary Mead, yet she found its opulence faintly oppressive. She sat by the window, her knitting needles idle for once, as she watched the morning mist curl over the lawn. The events of the previous day, the village gossip, the whispers of Charles's debts, Laura's mysterious past, and Mary's tale of a stranger had settled in her mind like sediment in a glass, waiting for a gentle stir to reveal their clarity. But it was the missing will, mentioned fleetingly by Mr. Grayson, the family lawyer, that now occupied her thoughts. A will, she knew from long experience, could be the key to many a motive, and its absence at Ashford Hall was as telling as its presence might have been. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and made her way downstairs to the breakfast room, where Mrs. Bantry was already seated, her cheerful chatter a welcome contrast to the manor's sombre air. "Jane, you're up at last," Mrs. Bantry exclaimed, buttering a slice of toast with vigour. "I was just telling Evelyn how you've a knack for seeing through people. She's dreadfully shaken, poor thing. This business with Sir Henry is too much for her." Evelyn Ashford sat at the far end of the table, her delicate hands wrapped around a teacup that had long gone cold. Her pale face and red-rimmed eyes suggested a sleepless night, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her fingers. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashford," Miss Marple said gently, taking a seat. "I hope you're managing under the circumstances." Evelyn offered a wan smile. "It's kind of you to ask, Miss Marple. I hardly know what to think. Henry was so private, and now this. The police, the questions, it's all so dreadful." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her eyes catching the glint of a gold bracelet on Evelyn's wrist, a delicate piece, expensive but understated. "It must be overwhelming," she said. "I understand Sir Henry was considering changes to his will that must add to the strain." Evelyn's cup clattered slightly against its saucer, and she quickly steadied it. "Oh yes, Mr. Grayson mentioned it, but I didn't know much about it. Henry never discussed such things with me. He said it was all in hand." Mrs. Bantry raised an eyebrow. "In hand, was it? Well, it's odd that the will's gone missing now, isn't it? Mr. Grayson was quite put out when he told us yesterday. Said it was meant to favour you, Evelyn, which is only natural, being Sir Henry's wife." Evelyn's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her plate. "I don't know about that. Henry was fair, but he had his family to consider. Charles, Laura. I didn't expect anything special." Miss Marple sipped her tea, observing Evelyn's discomfort. The young widow's words were plausible, but there was a hesitancy in her manner, a flicker of unease that reminded Miss Marple of a shopgirl in St. Mary Mead who had once denied stealing, only to betray herself with a nervous glance. She made a mental note to inquire further about the will, but changed the subject for now. "The gardens here are lovely," she said. "I thought I might take a walk later. They say fresh air clears the mind." Mrs. Bantry seized the opportunity. "Oh, you must, Jane. The rose garden is Sir Henry's pride, and Joyor was poor man. Perhaps Evelyn could show you around. It might do you good, my dear." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, if you'd like, Miss Marple, though I'm not much of a gardener myself." After breakfast, Miss Marple and Evelyn strolled through the gardens, the gravel paths crunching underfoot. The air was crisp, scented with damp earth and fading blooms. Miss Marple kept her pace slow, her eyes scanning the neatly trimmed hedges and flower beds. "Such a peaceful place," she remarked. "I imagine Sir Henry found solace here, with all the pressures of his estate." Evelyn nodded, her hands clasped tightly. "He did. He'd spend hours out here, especially after his first wife passed. He said the roses reminded him of her." Miss Marple tilted her head, as if the thought had just occurred to her. "Margaret, wasn't it? I believe Mrs. Bantry mentioned her. It must have been difficult for you, stepping into such a legacy." Evelyn's lips tightened briefly. "It wasn't easy. People in the village still talk about Margaret, how devoted she and Henry were. I tried not to let it bother me, but, well, you know how people talk." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "Villagers are much the same everywhere. In St. Mary Mead, there's always a story behind the story. I suppose Laura, being Margaret's niece, felt her aunt's loss deeply." Evelyn's step faltered, and she glanced at Miss Marple, her eyes wary. "Laura, oh yes, I suppose so. She and Henry were close once, but they had some falling out years ago. She never spoke of it, and I didn't ask. They reached a secluded corner of the garden where a stone bench sat beneath a trellis heavy with climbing roses." Miss Marple paused, her gaze falling on a patch of disturbed earth near the bench. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but the soil seemed freshly turned, as if someone had dug there recently. She bent down, as if to adjust her shoe, and picked up a small, torn piece of paper half buried in the dirt. The words "Trust no one" were scrawled in a hurried hand, the ink smudged but legible. She slipped it into her pocket, her expression unchanged. "What a charming spot," she said, straightening up. "Do you come here often, Mrs. Ashford?" Evelyn shook her head. Not really. Henry liked it, but I find it a bit lonely. I prefer the house, where it's safer. Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was racing. The torn paper was a clue, deliberate or accidental, and it echoed a case from her youth in St. Mary Mead, where a desperate note had led to the unravelling of a theft. Was this a warning from Sir Henry, or a ploy by someone else? And why was Evelyn so uneasy about this? Part of the garden. They returned to the house, where Mr. Grayson was waiting in the drawing-room, his briefcase open and papers spread across a table. His thin face was drawn, and he looked up as they entered. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Ashford," he said, nodding. "I've been going through Sir Henry's documents again. It's most irregular. The new will is definitely gone. I found a draft in his safe, but the final version, signed and witnessed, is nowhere to be found." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded neatly. "How distressing," she said. "I understand it favoured Mrs. Ashford. Do you know who the witnesses were?" Mr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles. "Yes, the butler, Mr. Jenkins, and Mary, the housemaid. They signed it 2 weeks ago, but both claim they haven't seen it since. I've searched the study, the library, everywhere. It's as if it vanished, into thin air." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. "And the draft you found, what did it stipulate?" Mr. Grayson hesitated, glancing at Evelyn. "It left the bulk of the estate to Mrs. Ashford, with smaller bequests to Charles. And Laura, Sir Henry also included a provision for a local charity, which was unusual for him. He'd been talking about making amends for well-past mistakes." Evelyn shifted uncomfortably, and Miss Marple noted it. "Past mistakes," she repeated softly. "That's intriguing. I suppose family matters can be complicated." Before Mr. Grayson could respond, the door opened, and Mary, the housemaid, entered with a tray of tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it down, and Miss Marple watched her closely. "Thank you, Mary," she said kindly. "You must be terribly busy with all that's happened. I heard you saw someone near the manor the night Sir Henry died. How frightening that must have been." Mary's eyes widened, and she nearly dropped. "The teapot, oh yes, miss, it was awful, just a shadow, really, near the gates. I couldn't see his face, but he was there, I swear it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern. "Of course, my dear. It's only natural. To be alarmed, did you mention it to anyone that night?" Mary shook her head. "Not right away, miss. I was too scared. I told Mr. Jenkins the next morning, and he said to tell the police." As Mary left, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the maid's nervous demeanour. Her story about the stranger was consistent, but there was a rehearsed quality to it, as if she'd been told what to say. Miss Marple recalled a young servant in St. Mary Mead who had fabricated a tale to protect a lover. Was Mary hiding something or someone? The rest of the day passed quietly, with Miss Marple observing the household's dynamics. Charles Ashford arrived for lunch, his charming smile at odds with the tension in his eyes. He spoke of his uncle's death with practiced regret, but Miss Marple noted how his gaze darted to Evelyn whenever the will was mentioned. Laura, meanwhile, kept to herself, sketching in the conservatory, her face closed off to the world. Miss Marple tried to engage her, commenting on a vibrant watercolour of the garden, but Laura's responses were curt, her eyes flickering with something like defiance. That evening, as Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry in the library, she shared her thoughts in a low voice. "Dolly, there's something staged about this whole affair. The locked room, the missing will, the stranger, it's all too neat, like a play with too many props. I think someone is trying to distract us from the truth. Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled with excitement. You're onto something, Jane. I know it. What's your next move? Miss Marple smiled faintly. I think we need to stir the pot a little. If the will is the key, as I suspect, then perhaps we can flush out the person who took it. A little misdirection of our own might do the trick. Outlined her plan to Mrs. Bantry, suggesting they hint to Inspector Craddock that a copy of the will had been found, but not reveal its contents. The idea was to watch the household's reactions, to see who might betray themselves. Mrs. Bantry, delighted by the prospect of a scheme, agreed to play her part, dropping subtle hints at dinner. As the meal progressed, Miss Marple observed the suspects closely. Charles laughed a little too loudly at a remark about the estate. Evelyn toyed with her food, and Laura's eyes darted to Mr. Grayson, who remained impassive. When Mrs. Bantry casually mentioned that some papers had turned up in the library, the room fell silent for a moment. Charles recovered first, asking lightly what she meant, but Miss Marple saw the flicker of alarm in his eyes. Evelyn excused herself early, claiming a headache, and Laura's hand tightened around her wineglass later. As Miss Marple prepared for bed, she slipped the torn paper from her pocket and examined it again. Trust no one, she murmured. It was a melodramatic phrase, but it carried weight. She thought of Sir Henry, a man burdened by his past, and of the family he'd left behind, each with their own secrets. The will, she was certain, was at the heart of it all, but it was the human frailties, greed, fear, revenge that would lead her to the truth. She tucked the paper away and picked up her knitting, the needles resuming their steady rhythm. Tomorrow, she would visit the study again, looking for the clue she was sure lay hidden there. For now, she let her mind wander, drawing parallels to a case from years ago, when a missing document had been the key to a betrayal. Ashford Hall, like St. Mary Mead, was a stage, and its players were revealing themselves, one misstep at a time. Chapter 6. A clue in the garden. The morning mist hung low over Ashford Hall's gardens, softening the edges of the rose beds and lending an ethereal quality to the sprawling lawns. Miss Marple, dressed in her sensible coat and hat, stepped out. From the manor's side door, her breath visible in the chill air. The house behind her loomed silent, its inhabitants still stirring after a restless night. But the garden called to her with the promise of secrets. Her walk with Evelyn the previous day had yielded the torn scrap of paper. Trust no one, and Miss Marple was certain the grounds held more to reveal. She had learned, over years of unraveling human tangles, that people often left traces of their intentions in the places they thought unwatched. Her shoes crunched softly on the gravel path as she retraced her steps toward the secluded corner where she'd found the note. The stone bench beneath the rose trellis came into view, its weathered surface damp with dew. Miss Marple paused, her sharp eyes scanning the area. The patch of disturbed earth she'd noticed yesterday was still there, a subtle irregularity. In the otherwise manicured flower bed, she knelt, careful not to soil her skirt, and examined it more closely. The soil was loose, as if turned over recently, and a faint indentation suggested something had been pressed into it, perhaps a heel, or the edge of a spade. She straightened, her mind turning over possibilities. The note, with its cryptic warning, could have been dropped accidentally, but its placement near the bench felt deliberate, like a breadcrumb left for someone to find. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, years ago, when a young man had hidden a stolen necklace in a garden, only to be betrayed by a muddy footprint. Gardens, she mused, were as telling as drawing rooms. If one knew where to look. Miss Marple continued her stroll, her pace unhurried but purposeful. The garden was a maze of paths and hedges, with nooks that invited privacy, a perfect place for clandestine meetings or hidden deeds. She passed a small fountain, its water trickling faintly, and noted a low wall partially obscured by ivy. Something caught her eye, a glint of metal half buried in the soil. She bent down, using her handkerchief to brush away the dirt, and uncovered a small silver cigarette case, its surface engraved with the initials C. Charles Ashford, no doubt. She turned the case over in her hands, noting a faint scratch along the edge, as if it had been dropped or thrown. Charles had claimed to be in London the night of Sir Henry's death, but the village gossip, confirmed by Mrs. Lucas, placed him in St. Mary Mead. This cigarette case, discarded in the garden, suggested he'd been at Ashford Hall Law, near it more recently than he admitted. Miss Marple slipped the case into her pocket, alongside the torn note, and continued her walk, her mind weaving connections. The garden path led her to a greenhouse, its glass panes fogged with condensation. She pushed open the door, the warm, earthy scent of plants enveloping her. Inside, Laura Ashford sat on a wooden bench, her sketchbook open on her lap, a pencil moving rapidly across the page. Her dark hair was pinned loosely, and her face, usually so guarded, was softened by concentration. Miss Marple approached quietly, not wishing to startle her. "Good morning, Miss Ashford," she said, her voice gentle. "I see you've found a peaceful spot for your sketching." Laura looked up, her expression shifting to one of wary politeness. "Oh, Miss Marple, yes, the greenhouse is quiet. I come here to think." Miss Marple peered at the sketchbook, catching a glimpse of a detailed drawing of the garden, with a rose trellis prominently featured. "How lovely," she said. "You've captured the roses beautifully. I was just admiring them myself. Such a tranquil place, though I imagine it sees its share of secrets." Laura's pencil paused, and her eyes flickered with something surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. "Secrets? It's just a garden, Miss Marple. Nothing happens here." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "Oh, you'd be surprised what gardens reveal. In my village, a young couple once used a rose garden for secret meetings until a lost earring gave them away. People are careless, even when they think they're alone." Laura closed her sketchbook with a snap. "I suppose so, but I'm just here to draw, not to hide anything." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise, though I did find something curious near the rose trellis's scrap of paper with some writing on it. 'Trust no one,' it said. Quite dramatic, don't you think?" Laura's face paled, and her fingers tightened on the sketchbook. "A note. I don't know anything about that. People are always leaving things around." Miss Marple nodded, as if satisfied, but her mind noted Laura's reaction. The young woman's unease was palpable, and it reminded Miss Marple of a St. Mary Mead girl who had once denied knowing about a stolen letter, only to blush at its mention. She changed the subject, asking about Laura's painting technique, and soon excused herself, leaving Laura to her sketches as she returned to the house. Miss Marple encountered Mr. Grayson, the lawyer, emerging from the library. His briefcase was clutched tightly, and his thin face was etched with worry. "Miss Marple," he said, nodding, "I was just looking for you. I've been through Sir Henry's papers again, and I'm certain the missing will was taken after his death. The draft I found was dated a week ago, and it's clear he intended to finalize it. Someone must have known its contents. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes sharp behind her mild expression. That's most intriguing, Mr. Grayson. Do you think the thief knew what they were looking for? Grayson hesitated. I can't say for certain, but the will favoured Mrs. Ashford heavily, which caused some tension with Charles and Laura. Sir Henry was also planning a substantial donation to a local charity, which was unexpected. He mentioned something about making amends, but he was vague about the details. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the note, "Trust no one." Had Sir Henry suspected someone close to him? She thanked Mr. Grayson and made her way to the drawing room, where Mrs. Bantry was arranging flowers with her usual enthusiasm. Jane, you look like you've found something, Mrs. Bantry said, her eyes gleaming. What's in that clever head of yours? Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded neatly. Only a few threads, Dolly, but they're beginning to form a pattern. I found a cigarette case in the garden, engraved with Charles's initials, and a note that suggests someone was afraid or wanted us to think they were. And Laura, poor girl, seems to know more than she's saying. Mrs. Bantry's eyebrows shot up. Charles's cigarette case, but he said he was in London. Oh, Jane, this is getting positively thrilling. What do you make of it? Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. I think someone is trying very hard to control the story we're being told. The missing will, the stranger, the locked rooms, all rather like a stage play, don't you think? But the props are starting to slip. She spent the afternoon in quiet observation, noting the household's rhythms. Evelyn was subdued, her jasmine perfume lingering as she moved through the house, her eyes darting nervously whenever Charles or Laura appeared. Charles, meanwhile, was all charm, regaling Mrs. Bantry with tales of his London exploits, but Miss Marple saw the strain. In his smile, Laura kept to the conservatory, her sketches piling up, and Miss Marple wondered if they held more than artistic expression, perhaps a clue to her state of mind at tea. Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry and Inspector Craddock, who had arrived, to discuss the case's progress or lack thereof. The suicide theory still holds, Craddock said, his tone clipped. The door was locked, the windows latched, and the gun was in Sir Henry's hand. But I'll admit, the missing will complicates things. We're searching the house again tomorrow. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression placid. A locked room is a puzzle, Inspector, but not an unsolvable one. In St. Mary Mead, we once had a case where a locked door hid a very simple trick. Have you considered the possibility of a hidden entrance? Craddock frowned. A hidden entrance. The study's walls are solid, and the floors stone. We checked for trapdoors, secret panels. Miss Marple nodded, as if conceding the point. But her mind was already turning to the bookshelf and the misplaced Pickwick papers. Books, she knew, could conceal more than knowledge. She made a mental note to examine the study again, perhaps when the household was distracted that evening. As the household gathered for dinner, Miss Marple watched the interplay of glances and silences. Charles joked about the estate's future, his tone light but his eyes watchful. Evelyn excused herself early again, citing fatigue, and Laura barely spoke, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. Mr. Grayson, seated at the head of the table, mentioned the charity bequest again, prompting a sharp look from Charles. After dinner, Miss Marple slipped into the garden once more, under the pretense of needing air. The moon cast a pale glow over the rose trellis, and she stood by the bench, her thoughts on the cigarette case and the note. She recalled a St. Mary Mead gardener who had once hidden a stolen watch in a flower bed, thinking it safe from prying. eyes, was the garden a hiding place or a stage for deception? As she turned to go, she heard a rustle in the hedges. She froze, her heart quickening, but her voice was calm. "Is someone there?" She called softly. No answer came, but the rustle stopped, and she glimpsed a shadow moving toward the greenhouse. She considered following, but decided against it. Her strength lay in observation, not pursuit. Instead, she returned to the house, her mind alive with possibilities. The garden, she was certain, held more than roses. Tomorrow, she would press her plan to plant the fake will, as she'd discussed with Mrs. Bantry. If the killer was among them, they would not resist the bait. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Miss Marple thought of the note's warning, "Trust no one." It was a phrase that could apply to anyone in Ashford Hallchels, with his debts and lies. Laura, with her guarded past, Evelyn, with her nervous glances, or even Mary, with her too convenient story. The truth, she knew, was close, hidden, in the shadows of the garden or the secrets of the house. She settled into her armchair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm, as she wove the day's clues into the pattern only she could see. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "In my village, a scent once led us to a thief who swore she'd never been near the crime. People forget how little things betray them." Craddock made a note, then leaned back. "We're still stumped on the will. Grayson's certain it was taken after the murder, but there's no sign of forced entry. And the study's locked door rules out an outsider, lest you believe Mary's story about the stranger." Miss Marple's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Mary's story is interesting, isn't it? But I wonder if it's a bit too convenient. In St. Mary Mead, we had a maid once who claimed to see a prowler to distract from her own pilfering people." "Do you like to point fingers elsewhere?" Craddock chuckled. "You're a sharp one, Miss Marple. I'll have another talk with Mary, and I'm planning a thorough search of the study tomorrow. Care to join me?" "I'd be delighted," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "I do find bookshelves so fascinating. You never know what they might hide." The rest of the day passed quietly, with Miss Marple observing the households. Undercurrents. At lunch, Charles was his usual charming self, but his laughter seemed forced, and he avoided Evelyn's gaze. Laura, as always, kept to herself, her sketchbook a constant companion. Miss Marple tried to engage her again, complimenting a watercolour of the greenhouse, but Laura's responses were curt, her eyes flickering with something like resentment. That afternoon, Miss Marple slipped into the study alone, under the pretence of fetching a book. The room was as she remembered: the heavy desk, the leather chair, the shelves lined with legal volumes. The faint scent of jasmine lingered, though fainter now, as if dissipating with time. She approached the bookshelf, her fingers brushing. The spine of the Pickwick Papers, still slightly askew. She pulled it out, noting its weight, and opened it to find a faint indentation in the pages, as if something, thinner letter, perhaps had been pressed inside and removed. Her heart quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. She replaced the book and examined the shelf itself, running her fingers along the wood. There was a slight give behind one panel, a subtle click that suggested a mechanism. She pressed gently, but nothing moved. A hidden compartment, she thought, or perhaps a passage, like the one in a St. Mary Mead manor that had concealed a smuggler's. Cash. She made a mental note to mention it to Craddock, but discreetly she didn't want to alert the household just yet. At dinner, the atmosphere was strained. Evelyn excused herself early again, her jasmine perfume trailing behind her. Charles drank more wine than usual, his jokes falling flat, while Laura's silence was almost palpable. Mr. Grayson, ever the professional, mentioned the charity bequest, again prompting a sharp glance from Charles. Miss Marple watched it all, her mind weaving the threads, perfume, arguments, hidden compartments into a pattern that was almost, but not quite, clear. Later, as she sat with Mrs. Bantry in the drawing room, Miss Marple shared her findings in a low voice. "Dolly, I think the study holds the key, but not in the way we expect. That bookshelf isn't what it seems, and the perfume is too deliberate, like a clue left to mislead. I'm going to suggest to Craddock that we plant that fake will. Tomorrow, as we discussed, if someone took the real one, they'll be watching." Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled. "Oh, Jane, you're brilliant. A trap, just like in one of those detective stories. Who do you think it is, Evelyn, Charles, or that secretive Laura?" Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "I'm not sure yet, Dolly, but I do know people are rarely as clever as they think. In St. Mary Mead, a man once hid a stolen ring in a flower pot, thinking no one would look there. He was wrong." As she retired to her room, Miss Marple thought of the jasmine scent, the cigarette case, the note, and the bookshelf. The truth was close. She could feel it, like the last stitch in a complicated pattern. Tomorrow, she would set the trap and watch the players reveal themselves. For now, she picked up her knitting, her needles moving rhythmically as she wove the day's clues into the tapestry of Ashford Hall's secrets. Chapter 7. The perfume trail. The late morning light streamed through the tall windows of Ashford Hall's drawing room, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Miss Marple sat near the fireplace, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on her scarf, her eyes occasionally drifting to the other occupants of the room. Mrs. Bantry was flipping through a magazine, her cheerful commentary on the latest London fashions filling the silence, while Evelyn Ashford sat by the window, her delicate frame hunched over a cup of tea she barely touched. The air carried a faint trace of jasmine perfume, a scent that had lingered in Miss Marple's mind since her first visit to Sir Henry's study. It was a clue, she was certain, but one that required careful unraveling, like a knot in her wool that needed gentle teasing rather than a sharp tug. Her thoughts returned to the garden, where the torn note, "Trust no one," and Charles's cigarette case had hinted at secrets buried as surely as the roots of the manor's roses. The missing will, the locked room, the stranger Mary claimed to have seen all were pieces of a puzzle, but the perfume was a thread that tied them to a person. Evelyn, with her nervous glances and jasmine-scented presence, was the most obvious link, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust the obvious. In St. Mary Mead, she had once solved a theft by realizing the scent of lavender on a stolen shawl belonged not to the thief, but to the person who had framed her. Perfume, she mused, could be as much a misdirection as a marker. Mrs. Bantry's voice broke her reverie. "Jane, you're awfully quiet this morning. Have you been sleuthing in that clever head of yours? I swear, you seem more sitting there with your knitting than most people do, running about with magnifying glasses." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles never pausing. "Oh, Dolly, I'm just an old woman with too much time to think. But I was wondering about Mrs. Ashford. She seems so fragile, don't you think? It must be difficult being so young and caught up in such a tragedy." Evelyn looked up, her pale face tightening. "You're kind to say so, Miss Marple. I am managing, but it's all so overwhelming. Henry's death, the police, the talk about the will. I wish I could just leave it all behind." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was alert. Of course, my dear. It's only natural to want peace. I couldn't help but notice your perfume. It's quite distinctive. Jasmine, isn't it? It reminds me of a young lady in my village who always wore it. Such a lovely scent, though it does linger. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her teacup, and a faint flush crept up her neck. Oh yes, it's just something I've always worn. Henry liked it. I didn't realize it was so noticeable. Not at all intrusive, Miss Marple said, her tone reassuring. Though it's curious, I thought I caught a hint of it in Sir Henry's study when I was there with Inspector Craddock. Perhaps you were in there recently. Evelyn's eyes widened, and she set her cup down with a clatter. The study? No. I haven't been in there since. Well, not since before Henry died. I couldn't bear to go in after what happened. Miss Marple nodded, as if accepting the explanation, but her mind filed away Evelyn's hesitation. The denial was too quick, too emphatic, like a St. Mary Mead shopgirl who had once sworn she hadn't touched a missing brooch, only to betray herself with a trembling lip. She changed the subject, asking about the manor's history, and Evelyn relaxed slightly, grateful for the shift. After tea, Miss Marple excused herself to take another walk, this time toward the stables, where she hoped to speak with the groundskeeper, Mr. Dobbs. The stables were a short distance from the house, their weathered stone walls partially hidden by climbing ivy. Dobbs, a wiry man with a weathered face, was raking leaves, his movements brisk but methodical. Miss Marple approached with her usual disarming smile, her umbrella tucked under her arm like a prop. "Good morning, Mr. Dobbs," she said. "What? A fine day for gardening. I was just admiring the roses earlier. You must work hard to keep Ashford Hall so beautiful." Dobbs tipped his cap, his expression cautious but polite. "Mornin', Miss A. The gardens take some work, but Sir Henry liked 'em just so. Pity he's gnoos to come out here himself, check in on the roses." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the stable yard. "It's a peaceful place, isn't it? Though I imagine you see all sorts of comings and goings. I heard there was a stranger about the night Sir Henry died. Did you notice anything unusual?" Dobbs paused, leaning on his rake. "Stranger, you say? Well, Mary's been talking about that, hasn't she? Can't say I saw anyone myself, but I did hear something a few days before. Raised voices, out by the rose garden. Couldn't see clear, but it was Mrs. Ashford Devlin that isn't young Mr. Charles. Sounded like they was arguing fierce." Miss Marple's interest sharpened, though her face remained placid. Arguing, how curious. "Did you happen to hear what it was about?" Dobbs shook his head. "Couldn't make out the words, miss. Too far off, and I wasn't one to eavesdrop." But Mrs. Ashford looked right upset when she came back to the house. Mr. Charles, he stormed off toward the village. Miss Marple thanked him and continued her walk, her mind turning over this new piece of the puzzle. An argument between Evelyn and Charles, days before the murder, suggested tensions that went beyond the missing will. She recalled a St. Mary Mead couple who had argued publicly over money, only for it to mask a deeper betrayal. Was Evelyn's nervousness tied to Charles's debts, or something more personal? Back at the house, Miss Marple found Inspector Craddock in the library, his notebook open as he reviewed statements from the household staff. He looked up, his expression a mix of frustration and respect. "Miss Marple, you've been poking about, haven't you? Mrs. Bantry says you've got a nose for this sort of thing. Any thoughts on our locked room mystery?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side. "Oh, Inspector, I'm just an old woman who notices things. But I was thinking about that perfume in the study. Jasmine, quite distinctive. Mrs. Ashford wears it, though she says she hasn't been in there since Sir Henry's death. It's odd, don't you think, how scents can linger? Craddock's eyes narrowed. Perfume? I didn't notice it myself, but I'll have my men check again. You think it's significant? Chapter 8. A nighttime revelation. The moon hung low over Ashford Hall, its pale light filtering through the heavy drapes of Miss Marple's guest room, casting faint shadows across the polished floor. She sat by the window, her knitting needles. Still for once, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse of the gardens below. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old wood settling, but Miss Marple's mind was anything but still. The jasmine perfume, the cigarette case, the torn note, and the bookshelf's hidden promisal swelled in her thoughts like leaves caught in an autumn breeze. Yet it was the human element, the tangle of motives and secrets within the Ashford household, that held the key to Sir Henry's death. Tonight, she sensed, the manor's walls might whisper something new. She had retired early, pleading fatigue after dinner, but sleep was far from her mind. Mrs. Bantry's enthusiasm for their plan to plant a fake will had set the stage, and Miss Marple had carefully dropped hints at the table, watching for reactions. Charles's forced laughter, Evelyn's nervous glance, Laura's tightened grip on her glass, each had betrayed a flicker of unease. Now, in the stillness of the night, Miss Marple hoped to catch a glimpse of the truth, for she knew from her St. Mary Mead days that secrets often stirred when the world slept. She rose, slipping on her dressing gown and soft slippers, and moved to the door. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single lamp at the far end, and she stepped carefully, her senses alert. Her room was on the second floor, near the staircase that led to the library and study, and she had chosen it deliberately, with Mrs. Bantry's help, for its proximity to the heart of the house. As she descended the stairs, the silence was broken by a faint murmur from below, a voice, low and urgent, coming from the direction of the library. Miss Marple paused, her hand on the banister, and strained to listen. The voice was female, she was certain, but too muffled to identify. Another joined it, deeper, male, and the tone suggested an argument, though the words were indistinct. She crept closer, keeping to the shadows, her heart steady despite the thrill of discovery. At the library door, slightly ajar, she stopped, peering through the narrow gap. Inside, Laura Ashford stood by the fireplace, her silhouette sharp against the dying embers. Across from her was Mr. Grayson, the lawyer, his thin frame tense, his hands gesturing as he spoke in a hushed tone. Miss Marple caught only fragments. Can't keep it hidden forever. From Laura, and so dangerous, you know what. He was like, from Grayson. Their voices dropped lower, and Miss Marple leaned closer, her breath shallow. Laura's next words were clearer, laced with bitterness. He ruined her, Grayson. You know it as well as I do. Margaret deserved better, and he never paid for it. If that will comes out, Grayson cut her off, his voice sharp. Enough, Laura. You're treading on dangerous ground. Let the police handle it. Miss Marple's mind raced. Margaret, Sir Henry's first wife, had surfaced again, a ghost haunting the present. Laura's tone suggested a deep grudge, one tied to her abrupt departure from St. Mary Mead years ago. Had Sir Henry wronged his first wife, and was Laura's return a quest for justice or revenge? Grayson's caution hinted at knowledge he wasn't sharing, perhaps to protect Laura or himself. The conversation ended abruptly, and Miss Marple retreated to the staircase, her slippers silent on the carpet. She reached her room just as footsteps echoed in the hall, and she closed the door softly, her heart pounding not from fear but from the thrill of a new thread in the tapestry. She sat by the window again, her knitting untouched, and pieced together what she'd heard. Laura's reference to Margaret and the will suggested a motive rooted in the past, but Grayson's involvement was unexpected. Was he an ally, a conspirator, or merely a man caught in the crossfire of family secrets? She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a young woman's late-night confession to a vicar had unravelled a theft. Nighttime, Miss Marple knew, loosened tongues, and Ashford Hall was no different. She resolved to watch Laura closely and to probe Grayson's role further. But first, she needed to confirm her suspicions about the study's bookshelf, where the misplaced Pickwick papers and the faint click of a hidden panel had piqued her interest. The next morning, Miss Marple joined Mrs. Bantry for breakfast in the dining room, where the mood was as heavy as the silver cutlery. Evelyn was absent, claiming a headache, and Charles was subdued, his usual charm dimmed by a restless energy. Laura appeared briefly, her eyes shadowed, and excused herself after a few bites. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, shared a quiet word with Mrs. Bantry about the plan to plant the fake will. "Dolly, we must be subtle," she murmured. "I'll suggest to Inspector Craddock that we find the will in the library this afternoon. If someone took the real one, they'll be watching, and we may catch them off guard." Mrs. Bantry's eyes gleamed. "Oh, Jane, it's like something out of a novel. Do you think it's Laura? She's so secretive. And after what you heard last night," Miss Marple raised a hand, her smile gentle. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Dolly, Laura has her reasons, but so do others. We need evidence, not guesses." After breakfast, Miss Marple sought out Inspector Craddock, who was in the drawing-room, reviewing notes with a young constable. She greeted him with her usual mildness, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Good morning, Inspector. I was wondering if you'd had any luck with the study. That bookshelf struck me as curious books can hide so much, don't you think?" Craddock looked up, a wry smile on his face. "You're full of ideas, Miss Marple." "We checked the shelves, but nothing stood out." "Why, have you found something?" "Not exactly," she said, her tone disarming. "But in my village, we once found a hidden drawer behind a bookcase. It held quite a surprise. Perhaps you might look again, Ando. This is just a thought. Mrs. Bantry mentioned some papers turning up in the library. Could they be related to the will?" Craddock's interest sharpened. "Papers? She didn't mention that to me. I'll have a look. And I'll check that bookshelf again, just to be thorough." Miss Marple nodded, satisfied. The seed was planted, and she trusted Craddock's diligence to carry it forward. She spent the morning in the library, ostensibly reading, but her eyes followed the movements of the household. Charles lingered near the study, his hands in his pockets, his gaze darting to the door. Evelyn appeared briefly, her jasmine perfume trailing, and excused herself to rest. Laura was nowhere to be seen, but Miss Marple glimpsed her sketchbook on a side table open to a drawing of the manor's facade, with the study window prominently sketched at noon. Miss Marple joined Craddock in the library, where he and the constable were examining a stack of papers. She had slipped a carefully crafted fake will prepared with Mrs. Bantry's help among the books the previous evening, its contents vague but suggestive of Sir Henry's intentions. Craddock held it up, his brow furrowed. This was tucked behind a volume of Shakespeare. "It looks like a draft of the will," but it's not signed. Mentions a charity bequest and a division of assets. What do you make of it, Miss Marple? She peered at the document, her expression one of mild curiosity. How interesting. It does seem important, doesn't it? Perhaps you should mention it to the family discreetly, of course. Someone may know more than they've let on. Agreed, and at lunch, he casually mentioned the discovery to the household, watching their reactions. Charles's fork paused mid-air, his smile frozen. Evelyn's teacup trembled, and Laura's eyes flicked to Grayson, who adjusted his spectacles nervously. Miss Marple, nibbling a scone, noted each response, her mind cross-referencing them with the nighttime conversation, that afternoon. She returned to the study with Craddock, who was now determined to find the hidden panel she'd hinted at. As he tapped the bookshelf, Miss Marple stood back, her hands folded. "Try the section near the Pickwick Papers," she suggested. It seemed out of place. Craddock pressed the panel, and with a soft click, a narrow section of the shelf swung inward, revealing a dark recess. He shone his torch inside, illuminating a dusty passage barely wide enough for a person. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "A secret passage. This changes everything." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "In St. Mary Mead, we had a similar passage in an old manor. It led to a surprising confession. I wonder where this one goes." Craddock sent for the constable to map the passage, which led to a concealed door in the garden wall, hidden by ivy. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the cigarette case, and the note had, "The killer used this passage to enter and exit the study, staging the locked room scene." The jasmine perfume, though, pointed to Evelyn, or someone who wanted it to seem. So, that evening, as the household gathered for dinner, the tension was palpable. Charles drank heavily, his charm fraying, while Evelyn's hands shook as she passed the salt. Laura's silence was heavier than ever, and Grayson avoided her gaze. Miss Marple, serene as always, dropped another hint about the will, mentioning its charity bequest. The room stilled, and she saw Laura's hand clench under the table. Later, in her room, Miss Marple sat with her knitting, the needles moving rhythmically as she pieced together the day's revelations. Laura's grudge against Sir Henry, tied to Margaret's past, was a motive, and the secret passage explained the locked room. But the perfume, the cigarette case, and the note suggested a broader web, with Evelyn and Charles entangled. She recalled a St. Mary Mead widow who had staged a theft to cover a deeper crime, and wondered if Ashford Hall held a similar deception. As she prepared for bed, a soft knock came at her door. It was Mrs. Bantry, her eyes wide with excitement. "Jane, the fake will was moved. I checked the library after dinner, and it's been shifted to another shelf. Someone's taken the bait." Miss Marple's lips curved. "Good, Dolly. Now we watch. The truth is close. I can feel it. Tomorrow we'll see who unravels first." She returned to her knitting, her mind weaving the night's whispers into the pattern of Ashford Hall's secrets, each stitch bringing her closer to the killer's identity. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Ashford Hall's library, casting a soft glow over the rows of leather-bound books and the polished mahogany table where Miss Marple sat, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap. The discovery of the secret passage behind the study's bookshelf had shifted the investigation, and Inspector Craddock's excitement was palpable when he'd shared the news with her earlier. Yet Miss Marple knew that physical evidence, like a hidden door, was only half the puzzle. The other half lay in the hearts and minds of the household Charles with his debts. Evelyn with her nervous glances, Laura with her guarded past, and even Mr. Grayson, whose nighttime conversation with Laura hinted at secrets unspoken. The fake will, planted with Mrs. Bantry's enthusiastic assistance, had been moved, a sign that their trap was working. Now, Miss Marple waited, her eyes sharp behind her gentle smile, for the culprit to reveal themselves. She had risen early, joining Mrs. Bantry for breakfast in the dining room, where the air was thick with unspoken tension. Charles had been absent, claiming a business call in London, though Miss Marple doubted the truth of it, given the cigarette case she'd found in the garden. Evelyn was pale, her jasmine perfume lingering as she pushed her food around her plate, while Laura's silence was almost a presence in itself, her sketchbook tucked under her arm like a shield. Mr. Grayson, ever the professional, had mentioned the charity bequest again, prompting a flicker of annoyance from Laura. Miss Marple had noted each reaction, filing them away like stitches in her knitting, ready to be woven into a pattern. After breakfast, she met Inspector Craddock in the library to discuss their next move. The fake will, a carefully crafted document suggesting Sir Henry's intentions to favour Evelyn and a local charity, had been shifted to a different shelf overnight, just as Mrs. Bantry had reported. Craddock's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "Someone's nervous, Miss Marple," he said, holding up the document. This was tucked behind a volume of Dickens now, not Shakespeare. Whoever moved it didn't want it found too icily, but they couldn't resist checking. Miss Marple nodded, her expression placid. "It's curious, isn't it, how people betray themselves with small actions. In St. Mary Mead, a young man once moved a stolen letter from one hiding place to another, thinking it safer, only to lead us right to him. I wonder who felt the need to touch this will." Craddock rubbed his chin. "My money's on Charles. He's got motive those gambling debts you mentioned, and he's been cagey about his whereabouts. But that passage changes things. Anyone could have slipped into the study, shot Sir Henry, and made it look like suicide." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her needles pausing. "But the passage also suggests someone familiar with the house. Not a stranger, as Mary claims. And that perfume jasmine, so distinctive. Mrs. Ashford wears it, yet she denies being in the study. It's a small thing, but small things matter." Craddock made a note. "I'll have another talk with Evelyn. And Mary, she's been jumpy every time I mention that stranger. You think she's covering for someone?" Miss Marple's lips twitched, almost a smile. "In my village, we had a maid who spun a tale about a prowler to protect her brother. People lie for all sorts of reasons, Inspector. Love, fear, loyalty. We must keep watching." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Bantry, who burst into the library, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Jane, Inspector, you'll never guess. I overheard Charles on the telephone in the hall just now, talking about selling something, I think to cover a debt. He sounded desperate, and he mentioned the will, said it changes everything. Do you think he took it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "That's very interesting, Dolly. Desperation makes people careless. Perhaps we should make it known that the will is under lock and key now, say, in the study safe. It might push someone to act." Craddock grinned. "You're a sly one, Miss Marple. I'll spread the word at lunch. Let's see who bites." The plan was set, and Miss Marple spent the morning in quiet observation, her knitting a pretext for lingering in the drawing room, where the household passed through. Evelyn appeared briefly, her hands trembling as she poured tea, her perfume a faint cloud around her. Laura sat by the window, sketching the garden, her pencil moving with a fierceness that belied her calm exterior. Miss Marple approached her, commenting on the vivid colours in her latest drawing, a study of the rose trellis where the note had been found. "It's striking, Miss Ashford," she said, her tone warm. "You've a gift for capturing detail. That trellis looks almost alive. I found something near it the other day, a scrap of paper with a curious message. 'Trust no one,' it said. Have you ever seen anything like that in the garden?" Laura's hands stilled, and her eyes met Miss Marple's, sharp with something like fear. "A note? No, I don't know anything about it. People leave rubbish everywhere, don't they?" "Of course," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "Though it's odd, isn't it, how such things appear at just the right moment, like a clue in a story." Laura's lips tightened, and she returned to her sketching, her strokes abrupt. Miss Marple moved away, satisfied that she'd stirred something. Laura's reaction, like Evelyn's denial of the perfume, was a thread in the tapestry, and the secret passage was another. She recalled a St. Mary Mead case where a hidden door had led to a confession, and she wondered if Ashford Hall's passage held a similar truth. At lunch, Craddock played his part, casually mentioning to the household that the found will had been secured in the study safe, pending further examination. Charles's fork paused mid-air, his smile strained, while Evelyn's teacup rattled in its saucer. Laura's eyes flicked to Grayson, who adjusted his spectacles and changed the subject. Miss Marple, nibbling a sandwich, noted each response, her mind cross-referencing them with the nighttime conversation she'd overheard between Laura and Grayson. After lunch, she slipped into the study with Craddock, who was eager to explore the passage further. The bookshelf panel, now known to conceal a narrow corridor, was their focus. Craddock pressed it open, revealing the dusty passage that led to the garden wall. "This explains the locked room," he said, shining his torch into the darkness. "The killer could have come in, shot Sir Henry, and slipped out, locking the door from inside with a key." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the bookshelf. "But the key, Inspector, where is it? And why the perfume? It's as if someone wanted us to notice it." "In St. Mary Mead, a woman once left a handkerchief at a crime scene to point suspicion elsewhere. We must be careful not to follow false trails." Craddock frowned. "You think the perfume's a plant? But Evelyn wears it. And Charles's cigarette case in the garden puts him here, not in London." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "But people are rarely as clever as they think. We need to watch what they do next." That afternoon, Miss Marple took another walk in the garden, her umbrella a prop as she lingered near the rose trellis. The disturbed earth was unchanged, but she noticed a fresh footprint, a woman's shoe, smaller than her own, pressed into the soil. She thought of Evelyn's delicate frame and Laura's sturdy boots, and filed the observation away. As she turned back to the house, she saw Mary, the housemaid, hurrying across the lawn, her face pale. Miss Marple called out, her voice gentle. "Mary, my dear, you look troubled. Is everything all right?" Mary started, her hands twisting in her apron. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's just everything's so upsetting, with Sir Henry gone and all. I keep thinking about that stranger I saw. It makes me nervous." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was alert. "Of course, it must be frightening. Did you see anything else that night? Even the smallest detail can help." Mary shook her head too quickly. "No, miss, just the shadow by the gates. I told Mr. Jenkins, and he said to tell the police." Miss Marple nodded, her smile reassuring. You did the right thing, my dear. Though it's odd, isn't it, how shadows can seem so real in the dark. In my village, a girl once mistook a friend for a stranger out of fear. Mary's eyes widened, and she mumbled an excuse before hurrying away. Miss Marple watched her go, her thoughts on the maid's nervous demeanour. Was Mary protecting someone, or had she been coached to distract? The stranger's story, like the perfume, felt staged, a prop in a larger performance. That evening, the household gathered for dinner, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Craddock, at Miss Marple's suggestion, mentioned the safe again, emphasizing its security. Charles drank heavily, his jokes falling flat, while Evelyn's hands shook as she passed the butter. Laura's silence was oppressive, her eyes darting to the library door. Grayson, usually composed, seemed distracted, his fingers tapping the table. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing-room with Mrs. Bantry, her knitting a pretext for staying near the library. "Dolly," she whispered, "keep an eye on the hall. If anyone goes toward the study, we need to know." Mrs. Bantry nodded, her excitement barely contained. "I'm on it, Jane. This is better than a detective novel." As the evening wore on, Miss Marple's patience was rewarded. She heard a soft creak from the hall, followed by footsteps moving toward the study. She rose, signaling Mrs. Bantry, and they crept to the library door, peering out. A figure slender, female slipped into the study, the door closing softly behind. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her voice low. "Stay here, Dolly. I'll fetch Craddock." She found the inspector in the drawing-room, playing cards with the constable, and quickly explained. They hurried to the study, where the door was still closed. Craddock eased it open, his torch revealing Evelyn, her hands fumbling with the safe's dial. She gasped, spinning around, her face pale. "Mrs. Ashford," Craddock said, his voice firm, "what are you doing?" Evelyn's hands trembled, her jasmine perfume strong in the confined space. I was just checking the safe, I thought. I heard there was a will, and I wanted to see." Miss Marple stepped forward, her expression gentle. "My dear, you said you hadn't been in the study since Sir Henry's death. Yet here you are, and that perfume is unmistakable." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean any harm. I was worried, that's all. Charles said the will might ruin everything, and Charles." Craddock interjected. "What did he say?" Evelyn hesitated, then crumpled. "He said the will left everything to me, and he'd lose the estate. He was angry," said he'd make sure it never saw the light of day. I didn't know what to do." Miss Marple's mind raced. Evelyn's confession pointed to Charles, but Laura's nighttime talk with Grayson lingered. Was Evelyn a pawn or a player? She recalled Mary Mead, wife, who had confessed to protect her husband, only to reveal her own guilt later. The trap was working, but the truth was still a stitch away. Craddock took Evelyn to the drawing-room for questioning, and Miss Marple returned to her room, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The passage, the perfume, the note, and now Evelyn's. Actions all were threads, but Laura's grudge and Grayson's secrets loomed large. Tomorrow she would push further, using the passage and the will to force the killer's hand. For now she knitted, her needles weaving the night's revelations into the pattern of Ashford Hall's deadly drama. Chapter 10. The unexpected guest, the morning air at Ashford Hall carried a sharp bite. The autumn chill settling into the stones of the manor as Miss Marple stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the mist-shrouded gardens. Her knitting lay untouched on the bedside table, a rare lapse. As her mind wove together the threads of the past few days, the secret passage, the jasmine perfume, the cigarette case, the torn note, and Evelyn's fumbling attempt to open the study safe the previous night. Evelyn's tearful confession had pointed to Charles, but Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years in St. Mary Mead, warned her that the truth was not so neatly tied. Laura's bitter words about Sir Henry's first wife, overheard in the library, and Mr. Grayson's cautious responses suggested deeper currents, and the fake wills movement had stirred the household like a stone dropped in a still pond. Today, she sensed, would bring a new twist, one that might finally unravel the knot of Sir Henry's murder. She dressed carefully, pinning her hat with precision, and joined Mrs. Bantry in the dining room, where the atmosphere was taut with unspoken questions. Evelyn was absent, recovering from her interrogation, while Charles sat with a forced smile, his eyes bloodshot from last night's wine. Laura, as usual, was a shadow at the table, her sketchbook closed beside her plate. Mr. Grayson, ever the composed lawyer, sipped his coffee, but Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in his hand. The discovery of the secret passage and the planted will had rattled them all, and she intended to press that advantage. Mrs. Bantry, ever her enthusiastic ally, leaned close as the servants cleared the plates. Jane, after last night's drama with Evelyn, I'm positively on edge. Do you think Charles put her up to it, or is she hiding something worse? Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. Patience, Dolly. People reveal themselves when they're pressed, like wool caught in a snag. We must keep watching, especially now that the will is safe. Someone will make a move. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion. At the front door a sharp knock, followed by the butler's measured footsteps. Moments later, Jenkins entered, his face impassive, but his eyes betraying curiosity. A gentleman to see you, Inspector Craddock, he announced. And Mr. Thompson, claiming to be a friend of Sir Henry's. Miss Marple's interest sharpened, her thoughts flicking to Mary's story of a stranger by the gates. She exchanged a glance with Mrs. Bantry, whose eyebrows shot up in delight. Craddock, who had joined them for coffee, rose and followed Jenkins to the hall, with Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry trailing discreetly behind. In the entrance hall stood a man of middle age, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his polished shoes gleaming against the worn rug. His face was pleasant but unremarkable, with a neatly trimmed moustache and a calm demeanour that suggested confidence, perhaps too much so. He extended a hand to Craddock, his voice smooth. Inspector, I'm Edward Thompson, an old business associate of Sir Henry's. I was in the area and heard the terrible news. I came to offer my condolences and see if I could be of assistance. Craddock shook his hand, his expression wary. Mr. Thompson, your timing's interesting. We're in the middle of an investigation. How well did you know Sir Henry? Thompson's smile was measured. Well enough, Inspector. We corresponded about investments property, mostly. He invited me to discuss a deal a few weeks ago, but I was delayed. I only learned of his death yesterday from a mutual acquaintance. In London, Miss Marple, standing quietly to the side, observed Thompson closely. His manners were polished, his story plausible, but there was a calculated ease to him that reminded her of a St. Mary Mead salesman who had once charmed the village while peddling stolen goods. She stepped forward, her voice gentle. How kind of you to come, Mr. Thompson. Did you visit Ashford Hall recently, perhaps the night Sir Henry died? One of the servants mentioned a stranger near the gates. Thompson's eyes flickered, but his smile held. No, Miss Marple, she supplied, her smile disarming. Just a guest here, helping Mrs. Bantry. No, Miss Marple. Thompson continued. I was in London that night, at my club. I'm afraid I don't know anything about a stranger. Poor Henry, I can't imagine who'd want to harm him. Craddock made a note, his skepticism clear. We'll need to verify that, Mr. Thompson. Where can we reach you? Thompson provided an address in London, a respectable hotel, and excused himself, promising to cooperate fully. As he left, Miss Marple noted the way his eyes swept the hall, as if memorizing its details. She thought of Mary's nervous tale, and wondered if Thompson was the stranger she'd described or a convenient scapegoat. Back in the library, Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. What do you make of him? Shows up out of nowhere, just as we're closing in on the will and the passage. Seems too neat. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resumed. Indeed, Inspector. In St. Mary Mead, we once had a visitor, who claimed to be a distant cousin, but he was after a will, too. Mr. Thompson's story is plausible, but his timing is suggestive. Mary's stranger may be a red herring, but we should check his alibi. Craddock nodded. I'll send a man to London to confirm his story. Meanwhile, I'm keeping an eye on Evelyn after last night. She's sticking to her claim that Charles pressured her, but I'm not convinced she's innocent. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. Nor am I. The perfume is a puzzle too obvious, perhaps, like a clue left to mislead. But Laura's conversation with Grayson keeps nagging at me. They spoke of Margaret, Sir Henry's first wife, and a wrong he did her. It's a motive we can't ignore. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of activity. Craddock and his constables searched the study again, focusing on the secret passage, while Miss Marple lingered in the drawing-room, observing the household. Charles returned from his supposed London call, his charm strained, and avoided Evelyn, who remained. In her room, Laura, sketching in the conservatory, was more guarded than ever, her eyes darting to the library door whenever it opened. Grayson, meanwhile, was busy with papers. But Miss Marple caught him watching Laura with a mix of concern and caution at lunch. Craddock dropped another hint about the will, mentioning that the safe's contents would be examined that afternoon. The reaction was immediate. Charles's glass clinked against his plate. Evelyn's fork trembled, and Laura's jaw tightened. Grayson, however, remained impassive, though his fingers twitched as he reached for his coffee. Miss Marple, nibbling a cucumber sandwich, noted each response, her mind cross-referencing them with Thompson's arrival and the passage's discovery. After lunch, she took another walk in the garden, her umbrella a prop as she lingered near. The rose trellis, the footprint she'd seen yesterday, was gone, smoothed over, but she noticed a fresh cigarette butt in the soil, its brand matching the case she'd found. Charles, she thought, or someone using his habits to point suspicion. She pocketed the butt, her thoughts on Thompson's polished demeanour. Was he a player in this drama, or a distraction? Back in the house, she joined Craddock in the study, where he was examining the safe. No sign of tampering, he said, frustrated. But Evelyn's attempt last night suggests she knows more than she's letting on. And Thompson, my man, in London, says his hotel confirms he was there, but only until the afternoon of the murder. He could have made it here by evening. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on fumes, and it could be a significant clue. It's possible that the perfume was used deliberately to mislead us, perhaps to frame Evelyn or to distract from another sensei, tobacco from Charles's cigarettes. In St. Mary Mead, we had a case where a woman used her sister's perfume to throw suspicion on her, and it nearly worked. Craddock's eyes narrowed. You think someone's playing games with us? Laura, maybe. She's got that grudge against Sir Henry, and she knows the house well enough to use that passage. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her tone mild. But we mustn't rush to conclusions. The will is the key, I think. Whoever took it fears its contents, and our trap is working. We should watch the study tonight. Someone may try again. Craddock agreed, and they arranged for a constable to keep watch from the passage's garden entrance, while Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry would monitor the library. As evening fell, the household gathered for dinner, the tension thicker than ever. Charles drank heavily, his jokes forced, while Evelyn's hands shook as she passed the peas. Laura's silence was a wall, and Grayson's eyes flicked nervously to the door. Miss Marple, serene as always, mentioned the safe's security once more. Watching for reactions after dinner, she and Mrs. Bantry took up their posts in the library, hidden behind a heavy curtain. The hours ticked by, the house settling into silence, until a soft creak broke the stillness. Miss Marple peered out, her heart steady, and saw a figure slip into the study. It was Laura, her movements swift and purposeful, a small tool in her hand. She approached the safe, but before she could touch it, Craddock emerged from the passage, his torch pinning her in its beam. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice firm, "step away from the safe." Laura froze, her face pale but defiant. "I was just checking something. I heard the will was here, and Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but unyielding. "My dear, you know this house better than most. That passage, for instance, you grew up here, didn't you? You'd know its secrets, like the one behind the bookshelf." Laura's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Craddock took her arm, leading her to the drawing room for questioning. Miss Marple followed, her mind racing. Laura's attempt on the safe, combined with her talk of Margaret, pointed to a deep motive, but Thompson's arrival and Evelyn's actions muddied the waters. She recalled a St. Mary Mead girl who had stolen to avenge a family wrong, only to be caught by her own impatience. As Craddock questioned Laura, Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry, her knitting resumed. "Dolly," she whispered, "we're close. Laura's move tonight confirms her interest in the will, but I suspect there's more to Thompson than he's let on. Tomorrow we'll push harder, perhaps a confrontation in the library, with all the players present." Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled. "Oh, Jane, it's thrilling, like the climax of a play." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. The trap was closing, and the truth woven from perfume, passages, and past grudges was almost within reach. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where human nature always revealed itself, and knew Ashford Hall was no different. Tomorrow, the final stitches would fall into place. Chapter 11. The alibi crumbles, the morning light crept through the heavy curtains of Ashford Hall's drawing room, casting a soft glow over the ornate furniture and the tense faces of its occupants. Miss Marple sat near the window, her knitting needles moving with their usual steady rhythm, though her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail of the scene. The events of the previous night, Laura's attempt to open the study safe, caught by Inspector Craddock's timely intervention, had set the household on edge. The fake will, carefully planted by Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry, had done its work, flushing out a reaction. But the puzzle of Sir Henry's death was far from solved. Laura's actions pointed to her, yet the jasmine perfume, Charles's cigarette case, and the mysterious Mr. Thompson lingered in Miss Marple's mind. Threads in a tapestry that was nearly complete but still missing its final stitch. She had risen early, joining Mrs. Bantry for breakfast, where the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. Laura had not appeared, confined to her room under Craddock's orders, while Evelyn's pale face and trembling hands betrayed her sleepless night. Charles, unusually subdued, picked at his food, his charm replaced by a nervous energy that Miss Marple noted with interest. Mr. Grayson, the lawyer, was absent, citing urgent business in the village, but Miss Marple suspected he was avoiding. The growing tension, the arrival of Mr. Thompson, the self-proclaimed friend of Sir Henry, had added a new layer to the mystery, and Miss Marple was determined to test his story today. Mrs. Bantry leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Jane, after last night, I'm positively tingling." Laura caught red-handed at the safe do. "You think she's the one? Or is Charles still in the frame? And that Thompson fella's such a smooth talker, don't you think?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her smile gentle but her eyes alert. "Patience, Dolly. Laura's move was telling, but it's too early to tie the knot. Charles's alibi is shaky, and Mr. Thompson's arrival is convenient. In St. Mary Mead, we once had a stranger who claimed to be a friend, only to be caught with a stolen watch. We must keep our eyes open." Their conversation was interrupted by Inspector Craddock, who entered the drawing-room with a purposeful stride, his notebook in hand. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, nodding. "I've just had word from my man in London. Charles Ashford's alibi doesn't hold up. He wasn't at his club the night of the murder, as he claimed. The doorman says he left before dinner, and didn't return until the next morning." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, though her expression remained placid. "How interesting, Inspector. And his cigarette case, found in the garden. Perhaps he was here, after all. Did he offer an explanation?" Craddock shook his head, his jaw tight. "Not yet. I'm bringing him in for questioning now. He's in the library, looking like a cornered fox. Care to join me? Your knack for spotting lies might come in handy." Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose, her umbrella tucked under her arm like a prop. "I'd be delighted, Inspector. People do reveal themselves under pressure, don't they?" In the library, Charles sat by the fireplace, his usual charm replaced by a sullen defiance. His tie was loosened, and his fingers drummed on the armrest, betraying his unease. Craddock took a seat opposite him, while Miss Marple settled quietly in a corner, her presence unobtrusive but her eyes missing nothing. "Mr. Ashford," Craddock began, his voice firm, "your alibi's fallen apart. You weren't at your club the night Sir Henry died. Care to tell me where you were?" Charles's eyes darted to Miss Marple, then back to Craddock. I was in London, Inspector. Not at the club, maybe, but I was out, seeing friends. I don't keep a diary of every minute." Craddock leaned forward. "Friends, names, please. And while you're at it, explain why your cigarette case was found in the garden here, not 10 feet from where a mysterious note turned up. You told us you hadn't been to Ashford Hall in weeks." Charles's face flushed, and he ran a hand through his hair. "The cigarette case. I must have dropped it last time I was here. It's been weeks, I swear. Look, I didn't kill my uncle. He was a tough old man, but I had no reason to hurt him." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft but piercing. "No reason, Mr. Ashford. I understand you have some debts gambling, I believe. A new will favouring Mrs. Ashford might have been inconvenient. In St. Mary Mead, we had a young man who lied about his whereabouts to hide a debt. He meant no harm, but lies have a way." of unraveling. Charles's jaw tightened, and his eyes flashed with anger. I don't need your village stories, Miss Marple. Yes, I owe money, but I'd never kill for it. I was in London, and I can prove it. Just give me time to contact my friends. Craddock made a note. You'll need to do better than that. Charles, and what about your argument with Evelyn a few days before the murder? The groundskeeper heard you in the garden, sounding heated. Charles's hands clenched. Evelyn. That was nothing, just a family spat. She was worried about the will, said it might cause trouble. I told her to stay out of it. That's all. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click filling the silence. She noted Charles's fear, his quick deflection to Evelyn, and the way his eyes avoided hers. He was hiding something, but whether it was murder or another secret, she wasn't sure. She thought of a St. Mary Mead gambler who had lied to protect a lover, and wondered if Charles's desperation stemmed from more than money. Craddock dismissed Charles with a warning to stay in the house, and Miss Marple followed him to the study, where the secret passage remained a focal point. He's lying, Craddock said, his frustration clear. But we've got no hard evidence tying him to the study. The passage explains the locked room, but we need more prints, a witness, something. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the bookshelf where the Pickwick papers still sat askew. The passage is key, Inspector, but so is motive. Charles's debts are compelling, but Laura's attempt on the safe suggests she, too, fears the will's contents. And Mr. Thompson, his alibi is too tidy. In St. Mary Mead, a man once claimed to be in London when he was really in the next village, planning a theft. Craddock grinned. You and your village, Miss Marple. I've got men checking Thompson's story further. Meanwhile, I'm questioning Laura again. She's not talking, but her move last night was desperate. Miss Marple spent the afternoon in the drawing room, her knitting a pretext for observing the household. Evelyn emerged, her jasmine perfume trailing, and apologized for her actions, claiming fear had driven her to check the safe. Laura, released from her room, kept to the conservatory, her sketches growing darker, with jagged lines and shadowed figures. Grayson returned from the village, his face drawn, and avoided Miss Marple's gaze. Thompson, to her surprise, reappeared, claiming he'd forgotten to leave a condolence note for the family. His polished manners grated on her, like a St. Mary. Mead conman, who had once charmed the vicar's wife, at tea. Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry, sharing her thoughts in a low voice. Dolly, Charles's alibi is crumbling, but Laura's motive, her anger over Margaret, feels deeper, and Thompson. He's too convenient. I think we need to push harder. Perhaps another hint about the will, or a question about Margaret's past, to see who reacts. Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled. Oh, Jane, you're brilliant. Shall I drop a word about Margaret at dinner? I could say I heard a rumour about her and Sir Henry, something scandalous. Miss Marple nodded. Discreetly, Dolly. We don't want to scare them off, just stir the pot. At dinner, the household gathered in uneasy silence, the clink of cutlery the only sound. Mrs. Bantry, true to her word, mentioned a village rumour about Margaret's sudden illness before her death, hinting at Sir Henry's role. Laura's fork froze, her face pale, while Charles's glass clinked against his plate. Evelyn's eyes darted to Grayson, who cleared his throat and changed the subject. Thompson, invited to stay for dinner, smiled blandly, but Miss Marple saw his hand tighten on his napkin. After dinner, she slipped into the library, where Craddock was reviewing notes. Inspector, she said, I think we should stage a confrontation tomorrow. Gather everyone in the library, reveal the passage, and press them about the will and Margaret. Someone will crack. Craddock agreed, and they planned to assemble. The household the next morning, as Miss Marple returned to her room, she heard a soft footstep in the hall. Peering out, she saw Thompson lingering near the study door, his hand on the knob. He glanced around, then slipped inside. Her heart quickened, but she stayed still, knowing Craddock's constable was watching the passage. In her room, she sat with her knitting, the needles clicking as she wove the day's clues into her pattern. Charles's broken alibi, Laura's desperation, Evelyn's fear, Grayson's secrets, and Thompson's suspicious timing all pointed to a web of deceit. She recalled a St. Mary Mead man who had lied about his whereabouts to hide an affair, only to be caught by a stray letter. Ashford Hall, she knew, was no different. Human nature was the same everywhere, and the truth was. Close. As she prepared for bed, Mrs. Bantry knocked softly, her face alight. Jane, the constable, caught Thompson in the study. He was looking at the bookshelf, but he claims he was just curious. Craddock's holding him for questioning. Miss Marple's lips curved. Excellent, Dolly. The net is tightening. Tomorrow, we'll bring them all together and see who unravels first. She resumed her knitting, her mind stitching together the final piece's perfume, passages and past wrongs into the tapestry of Sir Henry's murder, ready to reveal the killer. In the morning's light. Chapter 12. A parallel from the past. The morning at Ashford Hall dawned grey and heavy, the clouds pressing low over the manor's gabled roofs, mirroring the tension within its walls. Miss Marple sat in her guest room, her knitting needles idle. On the table beside her, as she gazed out at the mist-draped gardens, the events of the previous night, Mr. Thompson's suspicious foray into the study, caught by Inspector Craddock's vigilant constable, had added a fresh thread to the intricate tapestry of Sir Henry Ashford's murder. Charles's crumbling alibi, Laura's desperate attempt on the safe, Evelyn's nervous confession, and the lingering questions about Mr. Grayson's role all pointed to a web of motives. But it was the secret passage behind the bookshelf that had shifted Miss Marple's perspective. It reminded her of a case from her youth in St. Mary Mead, a locked-room mystery that had unravelled through a hidden panel and a careful study of human nature. Today, she was certain the truth would emerge. As she and Craddock prepared to confront the household in the library, she dressed with care, pinning her hat with precision, and joined Mrs. Bantry in the dining room, where the atmosphere crackled with unease. Charles was absent, reportedly still shaken from his questioning, while Evelyn sat pale and silent, her jasmine perfume a faint but persistent presence. Laura, released from confinement but under watch, picked at her breakfast, her sketchbook closed beside her. Mr. Grayson, back from his village errand, sipped his coffee with forced calm, his eyes avoiding Laura's. Mr. Thompson, detained overnight in a guest room under Craddock's orders, was not present, but his polished demeanour lingered in Miss Marple's mind. A puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Mrs. Bantry leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. Jane, after last night's drama with Thompson, I'm all aflutter. Do you think he's the stranger Mary saw? Or is Laura still our culprit? That passage, it's positively Gothic, don't you think? Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. It is dramatic, Dolly, but truth is often simpler than we expect. The passage explains the locked room, but the motives greed, revenge, fear are what drive this story In St. Mary Mead, we once had a locked room case where a hidden door revealed not just a killer, but a betrayal. We must watch closely today. Their conversation was interrupted by Inspector Craddock, who entered with a brisk nod, his notebook tucked under his arm. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, I've set up the library for our gathering. Thompson's being brought down, and I've called Charles, Evelyn, Laura, and Grayson. We'll reveal the passage and press them on the will. I want to see who cracks. Miss Marple set her napkin aside and rose. Her umbrella, a familiar prop. An excellent plan, Inspector. People under pressure often let slip what they mean to hide. I'll be there, observing. In the library, the household gathered under the high ceiling, the shelves of books, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Charles stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, his face drawn. Evelyn sat on a velvet chair, her hands clasped tightly, the scent of jasmine clinging to her. Laura leaned against a table, her sketchbook under her arm, her eyes defiant but shadowed. Mr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his expression guarded, while Mr. Thompson, brought in by the constable, stood with a calm smile that Miss Marple found unnervingly smooth. Craddock took the centre, his authority commanding the room, while Miss Marple settled in a corner, her knitting a pretext for her keen observation. Ladies and gentlemen, Craddock began, his voice steady, we've made significant progress in Sir Henry's case. The study, as you know, was locked, suggesting suicide, but we found evidence that changes everything, a secret passage behind the bookshelf leading to the garden. A murmur rippled through the room. Charles's hands clenched Evelyn's. Teacup rattled, and Laura's eyes flicked to Grayson, who remained impassive. Thompson's smile didn't waver, but his fingers twitched. Miss Marple noted each reaction, her mind cross-referencing them with the clues, the cigarette case, the perfume, the note, and the moved will. Craddock continued, holding up the fake will. We also found this document, a draft of Sir Henry's new will, hidden in this library. It favours Mrs. Ashford and a local charity, with smaller bequests for Charles and Laura. Someone moved it 2 nights ago, and last night Miss Ashford was caught trying to open the study safe. Laura's face flushed, but she said nothing. Charles stepped forward, his voice sharp. That's nonsense, Inspector. I wasn't here when my uncle died. You've got no proof. Craddock's eyes narrowed. Your alibi's broken, Mr. Ashford. You weren't in London, and your cigarette case was found in the garden. Care to explain? Charles's jaw tightened, and he glanced at Evelyn, who looked away. I told you, I dropped it weeks ago. Wasn't here. Miss Marple cleared her throat, her voice gentle but cutting. In St. Mary Mead, we had a young man who lost a watch in a garden, claiming it was an accident, but it placed him at a theft. Small things, Mr. Ashford, have a way of telling the truth. Charles glared, but before he could respond, Craddock turned to Evelyn. Mrs. Ashford, you were in the study last night, despite denying you'd been there since Sir Henry's death. Your perfume was noticed at the scene. What were you looking for? Evelyn's hands trembled, and her voice was barely a whisper. I was scared. Charles said the will would ruin us, and I thought, I just wanted to see it. I didn't kill Henry, I swear. Laura's eyes flashed, and she stepped forward, her voice low but fierce. You're all so quick to point fingers. What about Grayson? He knew about the will, didn't he? And Margaret asked him what Henry did to her. Grayson's face paled, and he adjusted his spectacles. Miss Ashford, that's enough. This is neither the time nor place. Miss Marple interjected, her tone mild but firm. Mr. Grayson, you and Miss Ashford were overheard discussing Margaret, Sir Henry's first wife. You spoke of a wrong he did her. In St. Mary Mead, we once had a family secret that led to a murder hidden behind a locked door. Perhaps you could clarify. The room stilled, and Grayson's hands shook as he spoke. It's true, Sir Henry and Margaret had difficulties. She was unhappy, and there were rumours of an affair. Laura was close to her aunt, and took it hard when Margaret died. But that's old history. Laura's voice broke. Old history. He drove her to her grave, Grayson, and you helped cover it up. That Willett was his way of easing his guilt, wasn't it? Giving to charity, pretending to be noble. Craddock seized the moment. Miss Ashford, you know the house well, including that passage. Did you use it to get to Sir Henry, to stop him from signing that will? Laura's eyes widened, and she clutched her sketchbook. No, I hated him for what he did to Margaret, but I didn't kill him. I just wanted the will to see if he'd admitted anything. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind racing. Laura's anger was genuine, but her attempt on the safe suggested more than curiosity. She turned her attention to Thompson, who had remained silent, his smile now faintly strained. Mr. Thompson, she said, you arrived so conveniently, claiming to be Sir Henry's friend, yet your alibi is vague, and you were in the study last night, near the passage, in St. Mary Mead. We had a stranger who turned out to be no stranger at all. Who are you, really? Thompson's smile faltered, and he spread his hands. Miss Marple, I'm just a businessman. Henry invited me to discuss a deal. I was curious about the study, that's all. I have no part in this. Craddock stepped closer. We're checking your story, Thompson. If you're hiding something, now's the time to speak. The tension in the room was palpable, each suspect eyeing the others, the air thick with suspicion. Miss Marple rose, her umbrella in hand, and approached the bookshelf. Inspector, may I? She asked, her voice deceptively soft. Craddock nodded, and she pressed the panel, revealing the passage. The household gasped, and she turned to face them. This passage, like the one in my village, hides more than a way in and out. It hides intent. Someone used it to enter the study, shoot Sir Henry, and stage a suicide, leaving the perfume and the cigarette case to mislead us. But the will for real one is still missing, and I believe it's here, in this room. She moved to a shelf, her fingers brushing a volume of the Pickwick Papers, and pulled it out. A folded paper slipped from its pages, its edges worn but intact. Craddock took it, his eyes widening as he read. It's the real will, signed and witnessed. It leaves most of the estate to charity, with small bequests for Evelyn, Charles, and Laura. Laura's face crumpled, and she sank into a chair. He was trying to atone, she whispered, but it doesn't change what he did to Margaret. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. Miss Ashford, your anger is understandable, but did it lead you to kill? The passage, the will, you knew them both. Laura shook her head, tears spilling. I didn't kill him. I wanted to destroy the will, yes, to punish him for Margaret, but I couldn't do it. Someone else got there first. Craddock turned to Thompson. And your fingerprints were on the bookshelf last night. Care to explain? Thompson's calm cracked, and he ran a hand through his hair. All right, I was looking for business papers, not the will. Henry owed me money, and I thought he'd hidden a contract. I didn't kill him. Miss Marple's mind raced. The parallel from St. Mary Mead clear in her memory, a locked room murder where a hidden panel had revealed a killer driven by revenge. Laura's motive was strong, but Thompson's presence and Charles's lies muddied the waters. She looked at Grayson, whose silence throughout the confrontation was telling. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "you knew about Margaret's pain and Sir Henry's guilt. Did you help Laura hide the will, or something more?" Grayson's face collapsed, and he buried his head in his hands. "I didn't want this," he mumbled. "Laura came to me, furious about the will. I told her to let it go, but she wouldn't listen. I didn't know she'd go so far." Laura's voice broke. "I didn't kill him, I swear it." Miss Marple's needles clicked once more, her mind stitching the final pieces. The passage, the perfume, the note, the cigarette casole pointed to a staged scene. But Laura's raw emotion and Grayson's confession suggested a conspiracy that stopped short of murder. Thompson's role remained unclear, but his interest in the study hinted at opportunism, not violence. Charles's debts and Evelyn's fear were threads, but not the core. Craddock took charge, ordering Laura and Thompson detained for further questioning, while Miss Marple returned to her knitting. Her thoughts on the will's charitable bequest. It was Sir Henry's attempt to atone, but it had sparked a deadly chain. She recalled the St. Mary Mead case, where a hidden panel had revealed not just a killer, but a family torn by old wounds. Ashford Hall was no different, and the truth, she knew, was moments away. As she sat with Mrs. Bantry later, she murmured, "Dolly, we're close. Tomorrow we'll confront them again, with the will in hand. The killer will slip, as they always do." Mrs. Bantry's eyes gleamed. "Jane, you're a marvel. It's like watching a spider spin its web." Miss Marple smiled, her needles moving, steadily weaving the final stitches of Ashford Hall's deadly secret, ready to trap the killer in the morning's light. Chapter 13. The confrontation. The heavy oak doors of Ashford Hall's library stood slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of morning light to spill onto the polished floor. Miss Marple sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her knitting needles clicking softly, a steady counterpoint to the charged atmosphere. The real will, found tucked within the Pickwick Papers, lay on the table before Inspector Craddock, its creased pages a silent testament to Sir Henry Ashford's final intentions. The household had been summoned for a final confrontation, and the air was thick with anticipation. Each suspect's nerves frayed by the mounting evidence, the secret passage, the jasmine perfume, Charles's cigarette case, the torn note, and Mr. Thompson's suspicious presence. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as her needles, wove these threads together, drawing on a parallel from St. Mary Mead, where a staged confrontation had unraveled a murderer's carefully laid plans. Today, she was certain the killer would be revealed. Mrs. Bantry, seated beside her, could barely contain her excitement, her eyes darting to the door as footsteps echoed in the hall. "Jane, this is it, isn't it?" she whispered. "The big moment, like the end of a play. Do you think Laura did it, or Charles, or that slippery Thompson?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her voice low. "Patience, Dolly. The truth is like a knot in wool, it takes gentle tugging to undo. We've set the stage, and someone will slip. They always do." The library door swung open, and Inspector Craddock entered, his face set with determination. Behind him came the suspects. Charles Ashford, his charm eroded by days of scrutiny, his eyes bloodshot. Evelyn, pale and trembling, her jasmine perfume a faint but persistent note. Laura, her face a mask of defiance, clutching her sketchbook. Mr. Grayson, the lawyer, adjusting his spectacles with nervous precision, and Mr. Thompson, his polished demeanour strained, his smile more forced than ever. The constable stood by the door, ensuring no one left, while Miss Marple's gaze swept over them, noting every twitch, every glance. Craddock took the centre of the room, holding up the real will. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm, "this is Sir Henry Ashford's final will, found yesterday in this very library. It leaves the bulk of his estate to a local charity, with modest bequests for Mrs. Ashford, Charles, and Laura. Someone went to great lengths to hide it, and we now know how the murder was done through a secret passage behind this bookshelf." He pressed the panel, and with a soft click, the bookshelf swung inward, revealing the narrow corridor to the garden. A collective gasp rose from the group. Charles's hands clenched, Evelyn's teacup rattled in its saucer, and Laura's eyes narrowed. Grayson's face paled, while Thompson's smile flickered, his fingers tightening on his cane. Craddock continued, his eyes scanning the room. "The passage explains the locked room, but not the motive. Charles, your alibis broken you were here, not in London, and your cigarette case was found in the garden. Evelyn, your perfume was in the study, despite your denials. Laura, you tried to open the safe, and you've admitted your anger towards Sir Henry over his first wife, Margaret. Mr. Grayson, you knew of that grudge, and may have helped conceal it. And Mr. Thompson, your sudden arrival and interest in the study raise questions. One of you killed Sir Henry, and today we'll find out who." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her voice gentle but piercing. "In St. Mary Mead, we once had a murder where a locked room hid a simple truth. Someone close to the victim used their knowledge to stage a deception. The perfume, the cigarette case, the note saying trust no one, they're props, meant to mislead. But the will and the passage point to someone who knew this house intimately." Charles stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is ridiculous, Inspector. I didn't kill my uncle. Yes, I was here that night, came to talk about my debts, but he was alive when I left. I swear it." Evelyn's voice trembled, her eyes darting to Charles. "He's telling the truth. I smelled the perfume in the study because I was there earlier that day, not at night. Henry and I argued about the will, but I didn't touch him." Laura's sketchbook slipped from her hands, landing with a thud. "You're all so quick to blame me," she snapped. "Yes, I hated Henry for what he did to Margaret. He betrayed her, drove her to despair, and I wanted that will gone to stop his fake atonement. But I didn't shoot him." Grayson cleared, his throat, his voice unsteady. "Inspector, Miss Ashford came to me in anger, but I urged her to let it go. I had no part in any violence." Thompson raised his hands, his tone smooth but strained. "I'm an outsider here, Inspector. I came for business, nothing more. I was in the study out of curiosity, not guilt." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Curiosity, Mr. Thompson. In St. Mary Mead, a man once claimed curiosity when he was caught rifling through a desk. He was after a debt, not unlike the one Sir Henry owed you. But let's consider the passage. Only someone familiar with Ashford Hall could use it so neatly, locking the door behind them to stage a suicide." She rose, her umbrella in hand, and approached the bookshelf. "This panel," she said, running her fingers along the wood, "reminds me of a case in my village where a hidden door led to a confession. The killer here knew the passage, the house, and Sir Henry's habits. They left the perfume to point to Evelyn, the cigarette case to implicate Charles, and the note to sow distrust. But the Willets' charity bequest was the spark. Craddock nodded, his eyes on Laura. Miss Ashford, you grew up here. You knew the passage from childhood, didn't you? And your sketches, they show the study, the trellis, the very places tied to this crime. Laura's face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, her voice breaking. Yes, I knew the passage. I used to play in it as a girl, hiding from Henry when he was cruel. And yes, I wanted the will destroyed, was his way of washing his hands of Margaret's pain. She loved him, and he broke her with his affairs. His lies. I went to the study that night, through the passage, to find the will. But when I got there, he was already dead, the gun in his hand. I took the will and hid it in the book, thinking it would stop his hypocrisy. But I didn't kill him. The room stilled, her words hanging heavy. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was racing. Laura's confession explained the will's hiding place, but not the murder. She turned to Grayson. Mr. Grayson, you knew of Laura's pain, and you helped conceal it. Did you know she went to the study? Grayson's hands shook, and he buried his face in them. I suspected, but I didn't know for sure. She was so angry, talking about Margaret, about justice. I told her to let it go, but she wouldn't listen. I swear I had Cromwell involved. In the murder, Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. In St. Mary Mead, a man once hid his guilt by blaming another, but his lies unraveled under scrutiny. Someone here is hiding still. Craddock turned to Thompson. Your fingerprints were on the bookshelf, and your alibi is shaky. What were you really doing in the study? Thompson's smile vanished, and he ran a hand through his hair. I told you I was looking for business papers. Henry owed me money, a lot of it. I thought he might have hidden a contract in the study. I used the passage because I'd heard rumors about it from an old servant, but I didn't kill him. I wasn't even here that night. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Rumors, Mr. Thompson. Or did someone show you the passage? Someone who knew this house well? Thompson's face tightened, but he said nothing. Craddock pressed him. We're checking your movements, Thompson. If you're lying, we'll know. Miss Marple turned. To Evelyn, Mrs. Ashford, you admitted to arguing with Sir Henry about the will. Did you enter the study that night, leaving your perfume behind? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. No, I was in my room. I only went to the study earlier to talk to him. He was alive, I swear. The room was a tangle of accusations and denials, but Miss Marple's mind fixed on Laura's confession. The passage, the will, the anger over Margaret, it all pointed to her, yet her raw emotion felt genuine. She recalled the St. Mary Mead case, where a woman's revenge had been masked by a staged suicide, and saw the parallel here. But Thompson's presence and Grayson's complicity suggested a broader conspiracy. Craddock raised the will. This document caused someone to kill. Laura, you admitted hiding it. Did you shoot Sir Henry to stop his atonement? Laura's voice broke into a sob. No, I found him dead, the gun in his hand. I took the will and ran through the passage. I was angry, but I didn't kill him. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft but commanding. Inspector, let's consider the scene. The gun was in Sir Henry's hand, the door locked, the perfume present. Someone staged it to look like suicide, using the passage to escape. Laura admits to taking the will, but the murder, its precision suggests planning, not rage. Her eyes swept the room, landing on Grayson. Mr. Grayson, you knew of Laura's hatred, and you've been nervous throughout. In St. Mary Mead, a man once covered for a killer out of loyalty, but his silence betrayed him. Did you help stage the scene? Grayson's face collapsed, and he sank into a chair. I didn't kill him, he whispered. But I knew Laura was in the study that night. She told me later, frantic, saying she'd found him dead. I helped her hide the will to protect her. I thought she might have done it, but I couldn't believe it. Laura's sob was raw. I didn't, I swear. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Thompson, whose calm had evaporated. Mr. Thompson, your interest in the study, your vague alibi, did you know about the passage because someone told you? Someone who wanted Sir Henry dead and needed a scapegoat. Thompson's eyes widened, and he stood, his voice sharp. This is absurd. I'm a businessman, not a murderer. But Miss Marple's mind clicked, the St. Mary Mead parallel clear. The perfume points to Evelyn, the cigarette case to Charles. The note to distrust, but the passage and the will point to Laura, who knew the house best. Yet her confession feels true. Someone else used her anger, her presence, to frame her. Craddock's eyes narrowed. Frame her? Who? Miss Marple turned to Grayson. Mr. Grayson, you helped Laura hide the will, but did you do more? Did you stage the suicide, knowing her hatred would make her the perfect suspect? Grayson's hands shook violently, and he buried his face in them. I didn't mean for it to happen, he sobbed. Henry was going to ruin me. He found out-I'd mismanaged funds years ago for Margaret's care. He was going to expose me in the new will, strip me of everything. I went to the study that night, through the passage, to reason with him. He laughed, called me a thief. I lost control, grabbed his gun. It was over in a moment. I made it look like suicide, used Evelyn's perfume from her room to confuse things, and left Charles's cigarette case in the garden. I knew Laura was angry. She'd been there earlier. I saw her leave. I thought she'd take the blame. The room froze. Grayson's confession, a thunderclap. Laura's sobs filled the silence, and Evelyn gasped. Charles's face was ashen, and Thompson's jaw dropped. Craddock moved swiftly, cuffing Grayson as the constable stepped forward. Miss Marple's voice was soft. In St. Mary Mead, a man once killed to hide his shame, but his careful staging betrayed him. You used Laura's hatred, Mr. Grayson, and the passage to cover your tracks, but the truth always surfaces. Craddock led Grayson away, and Miss Marple sat, her knitting resumed. As the household dissolved into shocked whispers, Mrs. Bantry gripped her arm, her voice awed. Jane, you did it. You saw through it all. Miss Marple smiled faintly. People are predictable, Dolly. Their motives greed. Shame, revenge shine through no matter how clever the disguise. As the room emptied, she thought of St. Mary Mead, where human nature had taught her everything she needed to unravel Ashford Hall's deadly secret. The will, the passage, the perfume, all were props, but Grayson's guilt was the thread that tied them together. Her needles clicked, stitching the final pattern as justice settled over the manor like a quiet dawn. Chapter 14. Justice and reflections. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Ashford Hall's drawing room, casting a golden glow over the faded tapestries and polished furniture. Miss Marple sat in her usual chair by the fireplace, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm. The soft click, a counterpoint to the subdued murmur of voices in the house. The events of the morning, Mr. Grayson's shattering confession in the library, his admission to murdering Sir Henry Ashford to hide his own financial misdeeds, had brought the mystery to its close, but the air still carried the weight of betrayal and loss. The real will, now safely in Inspector Craddock's hands, had revealed Sir Henry's final wish to atone for past wrongs through a generous bequest to a local charity, a twist that had sparked both greed and guilt among those closest to him. Miss Marple, sipping tea with Mrs. Bantry, reflected on the human frailties that had unravelled the careful staging of a locked-room murder. Mrs. Bantry, seated across from her, was uncharacteristically quiet, her usual exuberance tempered by the morning's drama. "Jane," she said at last, stirring her tea, "I still can't quite believe it. Grayson, of all people. Such a proper man, always fussing with his spectacles. And to think he used Laura's anger to cover his tracks. It's like something out of one of your St. Mary Mead stories." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "People are much the same everywhere, Dolly. In St. Mary Mead, we had a solicitor once who stole from his clients, thinking himself above suspicion. Greed and shame make poor disguises, and Mr. Grayson's were no exception. He thought he could outwit us with the passage, the perfume, and Charles's cigarette case, but the truth has a way of slipping through. The library confrontation had been the final stitch in the tapestry. Grayson's confession prompted by the pressure of the gathered suspects. The revealed passage and the recovered will had laid bare his motives. He had mismanaged funds meant for Margaret, Sir Henry's first wife, years ago, and when Sir Henry discovered the truth and threatened to expose him in the new will, Grayson had panicked. Using the secret passage, known to him from years of handling the family's affairs, he had entered the study, argued with Sir Henry, and shot him with the revolver kept in the desk. To cover his crime, he staged a suicide, planting Evelyn's jasmine perfume and Charles's cigarette case to mislead, while Laura's presence in the study that night, fueled by her own anger, made her the perfect scapegoat. Craddock had acted swiftly, arresting Grayson and escorting him from the manor in handcuffs, his head bowed under the weight of his guilt. Laura, exonerated but shaken, had retreated to her room, her sketches abandoned. Charles, his debts now public but his innocence in the murder confirmed, had left for London, muttering about selling assets to settle his accounts. Evelyn, freed from suspicion, remained fragile, her jasmine perfume no longer a clue but a reminder of her vulnerability. Mr. Thompson, whose vague alibi and study intrusion had raised questions, was released after proving his business dealings with Sir Henry, though Miss Marple suspected he'd hoped to find a hidden contract to leverage for profit. Now, as the household settled into an uneasy calm, Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry sat over tea, the fire crackling softly in the grate. The real will, read by Craddock after Grayson's arrest, had confirmed Sir Henry's intention to leave most of his estate to a charity supporting the village's poorer gesture. Miss Marple believed to atone for his mistreatment of Margaret, whose unhappiness had haunted Laura and fueled the tragedy. Smaller bequests went to Evelyn, Charles, and Laura, enough to ease their immediate burdens, but not enough to satisfy greed. Mrs. Bantry set her cup down, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Jane, how did you know it was Grayson? I was so sure." It was Laura, with all her talk of Margaret, or even Charles, with his debts. And that Thompson, he seemed so slippery. Miss Marple's needles paused, and she leaned back, her voice soft but clear. "It was the pattern, Dolly. The passage required intimate knowledge of the house, which Grayson had from years of managing Sir Henry's affairs. The perfume and cigarette case were too obvious, like props in a play meant to distract. Laura's anger was real, but her confession about hiding the will felt honest. She lacked the cold calculation to stage a suicide. Charles was desperate, but careless, not cunning. Thompson was an opportunist, not a killer. Grayson, though, had the motive fear of exposure and the means. In St. Mary Mead, we had a man who killed to protect his reputation, and his careful planning betrayed him, just as Grayson's did. Mrs. Bantry shook her head, marveling. "You're a wonder, Jane. You see right through people, don't you? But what about Laura? Poor girl, carrying all that pain for her aunt." Miss Marple nodded, her expression softening. Laura's anger was justified, but it blinded her. She thought destroying the will would erase Sir Henry's hypocrisy, but it only entangled her further. I hope she finds peace now, perhaps through her art, and Evelyn she need time to heal, but she's stronger than she seems. They were interrupted by a knock at the door, and Inspector Craddock entered, his face weary but satisfied. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he said, nodding. "Grayson's been taken to the station, and he's confessed fully. He admitted to using the passage, planting the clues, and hoping Laura would take the blame. The will's been authenticated, and the charity's already been notified. I owe you a debt, Miss Marple. You're nudging about that passage, and the will made all the difference." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Oh, Inspector, I'm just an old woman who notices things. You did the hard work, but I'm glad justice has been served. Sir Henry's intentions, at least, will be honoured." Craddock smiled, a rare warmth in his expression. "You're more than that, Miss Marple. If you ever tire of St. Mary Mead, Scotland Yard could use you." Mrs. Bantry laughed, clapping her hands. "Hear that, Jane? You're a proper detective. But I suppose you'll go back to your knitting and your garden, won't you?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her smile serene. "Indeed, Dolly, there's always another puzzle in St. Mary Mead, and my roses need tending. But I've enjoyed our little adventure here." The rest of the day passed quietly, as the manor began to settle into its new reality. Evelyn emerged, offering a tentative smile and promising to stay on until the estate was settled. Laura, still shaken, agreed to meet with a counsellor Mrs. Bantry recommended, her sketchbook tucked away as if signalling a pause in her grief. Charles sent a note from London, promising to reform, though Miss Marple suspected his habits would be harder to break than his promises suggested. Mr. Thompson left without fanfare, his business hopes dashed, but his freedom intact. As evening fell, Miss Marple packed her small suitcase, her knitting tucked neatly inside. Mrs. Bantry insisted on driving her to the station, chattering about the case all the way. "Jane, you must come back soon," she said, as they reached the platform. "Ashford Hall won't be the same without you, though I dare say it'll be quieter." Miss Marple chuckled, adjusting her hat. "Thank you, Dolly, for your hospitality and your enthusiasm. It's been quite a visit, but St. Mary Mead is home, and I'm eager to see my roses." The train whistle sounded, and she boarded, settling into a window seat with her knitting in her lap. As the countryside rolled by, she thought of Ashford Hall, of Sir Henry's guilt, Grayson's desperation, Laura's pain, and the charity that would carry his legacy forward. The case had been a mirror of St. Mary Mead, where greed and old grudges always surfaced, no matter how cleverly hidden. She recalled a village widow who had once killed for love, only to be undone by a misplaced letter, and saw the parallel here in Grayson's fatal misstep. Her needles clicked, stitching a new row as the train carried her home. Justice had prevailed, as it always did when one looked closely enough, and Miss Marple was content. The world, with all its secrets, was no match for the quiet observation of an old spinster with a knack for human nature. She smiled, thinking of her roses and the next puzzle that surely awaited in St. Mary Mead, and let the rhythm of her knitting carry her forward into the familiar comfort of home.